Hey everyone, welcome. Today I'm going to be having very little to say this morning. I'm having a little laryngitis. This morning we're going to be welcoming for our first presentation Riley Wilson and Robin Matteries from National Institute of Standards and Technology, commonly known as NIST. They're going to talk to us, give us some tips for hosting a Twitter trivia party. I'd just like to remind you all, please keep your questions to the end of the presentation. We will have a little room for some Q&A. And just as a reminder, the session is recorded. We're broadcasting to all of our virtual participants. And when we're all done, our friends at DigitalGov clean up the video a little bit, and then we'll send out a link. So if anybody missed it or you have colleagues who wanted to see it, you can forward it on to them. So everybody, please welcome Riley and Robin. Good morning, everyone.
Hi, everybody.
Let me ask, how many of you actually know who NIST is and what we do? Oh, I see I'm talking to a good government crowd, obviously. For those who don't know, the National Institute of Standards and Technology is our standards measurement metrology lab for the United States. We do everything from forensic science, physics, material science, cybersecurity, math, fire research. That's some of our coolest stuff. We got to burn a dry Christmas tree a few years ago, which was really fun. Cybersecurity, transportation, Internet of Things. The physics thing that a lot of people know us for is we helped redefine the kilogram and got rid of that nice little piece of metal that sits in a vault in France. And instead, we can measure mass now using a mathematical equation and a fancy number called Planck's constant, which some of you may know from Stranger Things when they screwed up and used the wrong value, and we got to call them out on it and got a lot of fun social media coverage out of that. So that's who we are. Riley's going to do the bulk of the presentation, and I'm going to kind of jump in here and there when I feel like I want to.
All right. So as Robin mentioned, we cover a lot of ground, and in a lot of different ways, it's difficult to bring our community together because we touch on so many different niche topics. But we were fortunate in that this past year we had an opportunity to talk about something that covers everything. This past year, 2019, was the International Year of the Periodic Table. So 150 years since its inception. And the periodic table, I mean, everybody knows what it is in the sense that, oh, it's this chart that's up on science classroom walls. But it really is the the chemical building blocks of everything that we see around us, everything that we are. And so as you can imagine, even though we have a large plethora of topics, quite a few include elements in the periodic table. So how does all this relate to a Twitter trivia party? Well, that's what we did this for. We had the idea to create a form of Twitter chat, which we all know and love what a Twitter chat is, using polling functionality in a sort of like package deal where it's a poll, then it's another poll, then it's another poll after 5 minutes. And so as you can see through the example that we have of the tweet, that's how it works, is we put out a poll, our audiences take a guess, and then at the end of 5 minutes when the poll closes, we would post the answer as a reply. And so this whole process took a lot of planning. We started thinking about this back in April, and the event was in November. So that's plenty of time to brainstorm throughout multiple meetings about the questions that we would use, the trivia questions, make sure that it spans all sorts of different components of our organization instead of just honing in on physics or chemistry, and really showcase all the work that's happening here. And then create hints for our audience that were unique and interesting, but didn't give everything away. And then at the end of the poll, having an answer, as you can see. And then another thing that we did when we had formulated all the questions, hints, answers, we tested it out internally with the rest of our team to make sure that everything was running smoothly, to troubleshoot any issues, see if there were any concerns from a technical perspective. And then when we needed additional clarification, obviously we reached out to the scientists, because we're not scientists and they know their work better than we do. And one thing to mention, we were considering content, as you can see in the PowerPoint. We were trying to avoid obvious self-promotion. So the main purpose of this for us was to increase NIST's brand awareness in the sphere of the International Year of the Periodic Table. It's something that was, as I mentioned, international. And we wanted to get our name out there among some of the leading organizations.
We should also mention that we have been doing a number of activities around the International Year of the Periodic Table and social media leading up to the trivia party that we did, and we were finding that when we were using that hashtag for the International Year, the content was doing really well for us. So that reinforced the idea of doing this, putting more investment into doing a trivia party, because we were finding anything with that hashtag was really getting more engagement than some of our average posts.
Yeah. And so with that in mind, that's what a Twitter party is. That's how we structured it. Let's take a look at some of our associated assets here. So we wanted to keep things dynamic, as with best practice. Everybody probably knows in here that it's better to have images, visuals, as opposed to just a static tweet. And so where we could repurpose content from our website, we did. But where we couldn't, we reached out to or worked with our graphic designer, as you can see, to create dynamic GIFs that would serve as hints or that would work well with our content. We also worked with our staff to create original videos. This one in particular is our librarian pumping iron in the NIST gym downstairs as a hint for.
I forget what the question was, but the answer was iron, and his audio is saying that he was too busy working out of the gym to give you a hint.
Yeah. The question was, what doomed the Titanic? What ultimately doomed the Titanic? And most people would think, oh, well, the iceberg. Yes, the iceberg played a role in it, but our metallurgists found out that it was the million teeny tiny iron rivets that didn't have the amount of, or had too much slag, and that's really what made everything pop, so to speak. So there was that, and yes, okay. And in terms of the original videos, we even enlisted in the help of another institute or another government agency institution, the National Institute on
Environmental Health Sciences,
yeah,
from NIH.
Mm-hmm. We had a question that related to arsenic, and so we asked their communications team if they could provide a sort of hint. They did. It was awesome, and we're really happy that we could work with them on that. And then, as in the third column here, we have media from other federal agencies. This particular GIF is from the U.S. National Archives GIFy. It was used in relation to a hint that says, "TikTok, folks, time's running out," and the question's answer was time. Yeah. And so we tried to include as much as possible other agencies to get them involved or to let them know. One thing in hindsight that we could have done is reach out to these agencies in advance and say, hey, we're going to use your GIF, but that was not something that we did. And so looking back, that's something that we will do.
That's a definite lesson learned. We found some great GIFs, as Riley mentioned, from other organizations, and they're public domain, so we took them and used them. We tagged them the day of when we used the GIF, but we didn't think in a lot of cases to reach out in advance and say, by the way, we're doing this, we're using one of your GIFs, just in case you want to help point people to it. So that's definitely something that went on our remember to do next time list.
That said, we did do some targeted outreach there. We reached out to everybody in the room through the Social Media Community of Practice listserv, and also to related science organizations and institutions. Yeah. So planning the event, there's that. Conducting the event is a whole other ballgame. And so we went ahead and assigned or established 3 different roles, staff roles essentially. It doesn't mean that necessarily that's everybody who needs to be in it, but that's just the way we decided to do it. I took on the role as publisher, and we had 2 additional roles. Robin handled technical support.
I was, as we call it, sensitivity support. There are some topics at NIST that are, as we call them, third rails, that we know we may get questions that come up during something like this. One of our least favorites is 9/11. We did some of the studies about what brought the World Trade Center down, and the 9/11 community, who does not believe it was due to fire, likes to come into anything we're doing in social media and start spamming us about how horrible we are. So just my role was to kind of keep an eye out on our hashtag and on whether any of those individuals started trying to pop up and take over what we were doing. So that was my monitoring role. Another individual in our office, Ben Stein, he is our most scientifically literate individual. He has an undergraduate degree in physics. So he was technical support in terms of monitoring comments people were making to see if we needed to respond on any of our science topics. And he had, as we call it, his phone a friend list of experts, so that should we get a question he didn't know the answer to, he could quickly call or email our scientific experts who knew we were doing this and say, hey, here's the question, help me do the quick tweet. And the purpose of that is it allowed Riley to solely focus on, let me get up the question, let me get up the hint, let me get up the answer. She didn't have to worry about what questions were being asked or how people were responding, thanking people who were putting up funny responses or funny gifts or any of that. That was Ben and I took care of responding. She took care of actually making sure the event ran smoothly.
Yes, one of the downsides to this format is you can't schedule anything out. It's all manual because Twitter doesn't let you schedule polls. And then, at least to my knowledge, there's no way of scheduling a reply. So just to make a mention of some lessons learned or some preparation tips, I went ahead and developed a spreadsheet full of each piece of final content along with timestamps and tagged links, we know campaign tagging, to make sure that we were prepared for going one by one. And then set individual alarms on my work phone to coincide with when the next hint, when the next answer, when the next question would go out. It's a little bit more manual, but it actually helped a lot. All right, and so that's what we did in the room. How about the takeaways? So we put up some numbers here because, you know, we're federal, we love numbers, but I really want to steer away from focusing solely on this just because this was a completely new idea that we came out with, a completely new format. And even so the numbers are kind of low for depending on how big your audience is. Our audience is about 56,000 people on Twitter. It actually did pretty well for our for us. And so in terms of takeaways, one of the first and most glaring ones that I can mention is that the amount of time that you have a poll matters, the amount of time that you set for a poll. So originally we had it planned so we would do 5 minutes and then close the poll. Twitter allows you to go from 5 minutes to 7 days, with the default at 1 day. And we just thought that would be easier for going one by one in terms of the content and keeping the process moving. But we had a little hiccup and left the default to 24 hours for one, and we realized that in the room that it actually performed really well. And we kept doing that towards the end of the poll. We made a decision in the room. And as you can see through the averages that we got for the poll tweets, something that was left over 24 hours, I mean, the engagement just shows that it's done better in terms of votes, in terms of impressions, retweets, likes, profile clicks. It just performed better. And so that's something to keep in mind is we initially thought, you know, it'd keep it running smoothly, but even if people couldn't make it to the poll, maybe afterwards they might share it and they can still engage with content. Another thing to note is we had a less quote unquote engaged audience, active engagement. And I mention this because there were less people liking and retweeting and commenting because this wasn't a normal Twitter chat. This was people engaging with the poll, and that was that. But we did get a lot of engagement in terms of votes, which is ultimately what the poll was designed to do. As you can see, on average for the 24 hours, it was 86 votes. On average for 5 minutes, it was 26 votes. even still, 26 and 86, that's a lot more than one of our average tweets would get in terms of a like or a share, retweet. And so we took that into stock. Honestly, it seemed like it made it a little more difficult in terms of the pre-promotion, just because if organizations didn't see how they could actively engage like they would in a Twitter chat where they're sharing their own resources, it's less likely that they would engage with this. So we had to find different ways to try to promote, and it's sort of a learning experience to continue on. Open to suggestions if anybody has them. And then as a small note, publish time varies by media, so it was really easy to just do a quick, tweet with a photo or with a GIF. Videos, like the original videos that we had, took quite a bit longer after you already uploaded it between the time that you posted it and you hit the tweet button. So that cost us a little bit in terms of efficiency, not too much, but just something to mention. And then finally, as I mentioned before, our goal wasn't conversions. Our goal was brand awareness. So we paid attention to link clicks. We paid attention to the people who got to our website, but we didn't necessarily focus on that as the main goal. And as you can see, in terms of impressions and totals, we got about 123,000. Any average tweet for us gets between 1 and 5,000 impressions. So if, at least on the low end, I can't do 41 times 5. I'm not going to pretend that I can do math. But 44,100, well, 41,000. I'm not going to, never mind.
I'm not in the math department. I rely on my phone for all things math.
In any case, these tweets actually perform better in terms of impressions and brand awareness than our average tweets collectively would. And then finally, our overarching takeaway for this is try new things. When I came to NIST, one of the most refreshing things was I came into a team, and by the way, I started here in April, and so that's why I'm saying that I came in and knew. I came into a team that was very willing to brainstorm and take advantage of new options, partially because we can't do paid promotions, so we have to get creative, and explore new ways to engage with our audiences. So you see 2 screenshots up above, not up ahead, up above. Since we did our Twitter trivia event, we saw that polls performed pretty well. And so we've started to incorporate that concept more and more into our overall promotions. The one that you can see is a debate between whether the decade starts at 2020 or 2021.
I'm going to pop in on that one.
Yep.
I want to just talk for a quick second about that because I know we all worry about, how does what we're doing in social media help the organization as a whole? And that's such a great story because we put that poll up, and after we put that poll up, some reporters started calling, wanting to talk to Andrew Novick. And in fact, one television station out in Boulder copied our poll. And instead of directing people to our poll, they started their own poll. So they stole from us. But it really did. I mean, he ended up he was on NPR. He had a Boulder TV station, and he had a slew of other media outlets that called wanting to talk to him about this topic once we put up our poll. So it really did kind of go beyond social media for us when we did this and engaged the audience. And when we got done, I was so impressed with the fact that we had almost 1,500 votes on this, fun little poll. And time is such a huge thing for us on our atomic clock, so it's tied right back in again to our science that we're doing.
Yes. That's the shiny, sorry?
There is not a firm answer, but Riley, go ahead, and you spoke to Andrew about this.
Oh gosh, it's debatable. So
what did Andrew ultimately say? Did he say 2020 or 2021?
He said it was debatable too because he didn't want to give a misposition for it. So, it's a debate even internally because if you were to say, for example, somebody was born in 1970, you wouldn't say that they came from the 60s. You'd say they were from the 70s. And so because any decade it's a period of 10 years, it doesn't necessarily mean it starts one versus another. So that's the way that people have culturally defined it. And then, but Andrew also mentioned that if we're starting at year 1 and not, year 0, our calendars start at year 1, then it would make sense to be 2021 instead of 2020. That's my attempt at answering what he gave me. Yeah.
The other piece I'll chime in on, and this is not on actually this question, but for all of, as we know as feds, we did talk to our Paperwork Reduction Act individuals before we did this to make sure that we were okay under the PRA, and we got clearance that yes, we were fine because of the nature of how polls work on Twitter and such. They gave us complete clearance to use this functionality. Mm-hmm. But we did dot our I's and cross our T's on that before we set forth.
Yes, anticipating that question. And then the other example, not quite as shining, but January is actually it's National Brains User Month, and so we've been using our poll functionality for another twist on a trivia. Instead of a trivia, it's an attempt at a riddle. I'm not exactly conducive to creating riddles, so we'll see if it's a good one or not. And
then if you click the show this thread, if you're actually on Twitter, it gives the answer with some links back to NIST content.
It does. And that's us. And that's what we did. Do we have time for questions? All right.
Hey, so IRS, we're definitely going to steal this. I'm wondering, did you reply an answer, a final answer at the end of each poll?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
And we did it as a tweet thread. So we did it as a reply to our own tweet with the hint, and then we did the reply at the end with the answer.
It packaged things nicely so that if anybody shared our content after the fact, they could respond to the poll, and then still get the answer by looking below. Sorry?
So if you're already doing that, wouldn't that be a way of combining it with a chat so that your partners can reply?
Yeah.
That's definitely a good idea. If you want to bring in other partners, is let them be part of providing the responses and the answers and links in that way.
And one last question. How did you promote it? Because I'll be terrified that no one participates.
So we promoted obviously on our own Twitter account and internally. And the big organization was it was AIP, I think, that then American Institute of Physics. So we have a very good relationship with the American Institute of Physics. So we went to some reporters there, and they promoted on their Twitter account. And to the American Chemical Society, I think, promoted as well.
We sent catered individual emails, targeted emails to organizations that we thought would be good for partnership or in terms of for promotion, because it factors into their mission and topic areas, and that's how we got the word out.
And again, I think tying into that hashtag that has been used, the International Year of the Periodic Table hashtag is used by all organizations over the course of the year doing anything related to the periodic table. So I think tying our promotion and the event into an established hashtag that other people were using and searching on certainly helped people find it who otherwise might not.
Yep.
And I will also mention as an aside, we did do, and I'd say with mixed success, we actually did an on-campus event the same day with the Twitter poll, where down in our library we invited staff to come and actually participate and vote themselves on paper, and gave out some little tchotchke prizes for those who got it right, for like one person who got each one right, to try and create a little bit of a staff community event on campus as well. And we partnered with our library and said to them, we'd love for you to do this, but we can't help because we're too busy running the online event. So they took it and ran with it and put up posters and had popcorn and got a host who emceed the event. And there wasn't a huge turnout, but it was the first time again that we've done some things like that. And it was nice to try and bring that kind of community feel. And we were able to then promote both the Twitter chat and the on-campus event through our intranet and through our internal communications channels, which was also a fun thing to do for our staff.
And for the people who did show up, now they know we have a Twitter account. There you go. Do we have any other questions? Okay.
Hi. So how many polls did you do? And I'm assuming it was an hour tweet chat?
It was an hour. We did 10 trivia questions.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And just on the back end, how many questions did you have to prepare and go through before you narrowed it down to the 10?
You did a pretty good job drafting the first round. I don't feel like we went through a whole lot more. There were a couple
maybe 12 or 15.
Yeah, there were a couple that we threw out, and the Titanic one we almost had to remove only because the individual at NIST who did all that research left, and we're like, oh, he was supposed to do our hint, and so that's when we went to our historian on campus because we thought that was such a cool question and such a fun thing that would attract attention. We didn't want to get rid of it. But truthfully, the hints, coming up with the hints was way more difficult than coming up with the questions because we wanted it to be helpful but not something that completely gave away the answer. So figuring out the hint was definitely the most time-consuming part of putting it all together.
And also the note about the metallurgist leaving speaks to providing ample time to prepare because you never know when some sort of kink like this is going to mess with your drafted content and you might have to switch tactics.
I know you said you weren't tracking conversions, but did you track follower growth?
That would have been a good thing to track.
If you use like a scheduling app, like I'm DHS SciTech, we use Sprout Social. If you go back, you could look at follower growth over a certain date range.
We would love to have the funds to use something like Sprout Social. Yeah, so if anybody has a little extra dollars laying around, they'd like to, just PayPal over to NIST Public Affairs, we'd happily take that and have that opportunity. Sadly, it's one of the things that drives Riley crazy is that we haven't found the funds for something like that.
Yes. That's all I'll add to that.
I'm just interested, Riley, in your background. You said you only just came to the agency?
Yes, prior to joining NIST, I worked for 3 years as a health communications contractor for the National Institute on Deafness and Other Communication Disorders under NIH. All right. Oh, okay.
The question not specifically related to the, the trivia, but just in your organization, how do you get engagement with your different labs, the different groups for social media? Or do they come to you? Is there a conduit to get those messaging, to you, or do you go out to them to?
Yes. So the way our public affairs office is set up, we have public affairs specialists who each are assigned to a different lab within the organization. So they certainly are conduits to be going out there and coming back to us with content. Oftentimes, though, they are focused on, the news stories they need to write in their media relations piece. So we have started more and more encouraging Riley to go out and go on lab when we're doing new employee orientation lab tours. Even though she's not a new employee, go along on this lab tour. If one of our writers is going out to meet with some scientists, go with them, Riley, and see if there's a story that you can take separate from what the news story is. We actually are going to meet next month with our postdoc association because our postdocs are really eager to get out there, but what they're doing doesn't necessarily rise to the level of a news story that our public affairs specialists would cover. So Riley and I will go present to them, and they'll come directly to us with their stories that could make social media but may not rise to the level of a public affairs specialist story.
And one of the things that I would mention that we're trying to strategically move towards on social media is handling the stories of the research that's in progress, not necessarily the research that has been published, because there's a lot that's happening here, but maybe it's being held up for some reason or it's going down the line, but we just want to showcase the stories about what's happening on campus and what's happening with our scientists.
We also tap into our affinity groups. So we have, Asian American groups, we have Pride groups, we have all of those different affinity groups, and we'll go to them and say, okay, this is Pride Month. What science are you as as someone as a member of the Pride group, what science are you working on? And let's feature you. We'll mention that this is Pride Month and you're one of our employees that fit in within that affinity group, but we'll focus on your science. So we're using those affinity groups as another way to find out what people are doing that otherwise may not cross our desks. Going to presentations that staff are giving to see what's interesting. So Riley, before Riley came on board, we had someone who was part-time social media, part-time running our blog. So now having one person dedicated solely to social media she's getting out a lot more because that's her only job than the person prior was able to do. So that's been really helpful for us as an office as a whole to cover more of what NIST was happening at NIST via social media, thanks to Riley being able to just go out and hit the ground running and beat the bushes.
Yeah.
Good morning. I was interested in how you develop hashtags, and do you work with your influencers when it comes to the material that you're presenting on your platforms?
So in terms of hashtags, we usually tap into things that have already been sponsored and developed to try to go into conversations already happening. It's hard to build up engagement around a hashtag when it's starting from scratch. That said, we did use the hashtag NIST Trivia to try to consolidate all of our content into that one area for that specific event. In terms of influencer marketing, that's something that we haven't fully developed or we've been looking into it.
Yeah, we're starting to do it. So I will say, for example, we did a video called Rethinking Manufacturing. That was about our Manufacturing USA program and how they're changing the face of manufacturing. And Riley reached out to a ridiculous number of organizations within the manufacturing space to say, hey, have you seen this video? It was done very documentary style, so it wasn't really NIST promotional. It was the story of two individuals who were in Ohio in a town that was really kind of falling apart. And from happenstance, they both ended up coming back to that town, learning about this Manufacturing USA program and choosing to stay and build a new manufacturing community of young people in their town. So we did it very documentary style. It didn't even really mention NIST or Manufacturing USA till the very end. And we really, Riley pushed with organizations that cover manufacturing and saying, this is a really great story. Could you share it on your social media? So again, that got a lot more attention because she found the right organizations that have people who care about that topic. And this is, again, sadly, something new for us that we're able to do because we finally have someone dedicated full-time to this task.
I will mention we were doing outreach to organizations and also to Facebook and LinkedIn groups, people who manage and administrate those groups, just to try to amplify that reach for that particular video.
And so obviously we can't do it on all of our content, but we're trying to be strategic on things like that video project where we put a lot of time and energy into it, things like the Twitter trivia party. We did that with the various chemical groups, physical groups, those sorts of things. So we are kind of picking and choosing where we want to put that energy to reach out to those influential groups.
And when you do this sort of practice, it's helpful to keep a log of which organizations responded, how they responded, so that you can build a list of like the usual suspects and recurring promotions or for future reference. Yeah.
We have some questions from the attendees online. Did you thread all the polls together?
We did not. We used the hashtag to keep those polls in sort of a consolidated way in the event, but we packaged the polls and the individual trivia into 10 different questions, and then used the threading to post replies and post the hints and the answers.
Awesome. Would it be possible for NIST folks to send links to their tweets so we could see which ones or a sample are part of their party, also to see how they did polls?
Absolutely.
I assume we should send that to you, Gabby, and you'll send it around. Okay. We can coordinate afterwards. Yeah, we can coordinate afterwards to get some of that material out. And then following this session, I'll excuse me, I'll have all the slides resent again and the link to the video. We have another question that came in. How long did you wait to post the answers?
About 2 minutes. So we did, well, as I mentioned, we originally planned to have 5-minute packages. At each 5-minute interval, we would post a new tweet, and then at about 2 minutes, we'd post the hint, and then at the end of those 5 minutes, so about 2.5 minutes.
So yeah, so it was the question, about 2.5 minutes in, it was the hint,
yes.
And then after another 2.5 minutes, it was the answer. Okay.
Yes.
And I have a question, actually. So this was the first time that you had thrown a trivia party, right?
Yes.
Correct. So in your mind, what to you before you started, what did success look like to you? And then after you had accomplished this, what did success look like after you? Did you reevaluate it?
So, you know, the big thing is, again, as Riley said, I didn't look at this from a what kind of conversions are we going to get. Metrics matter, obviously, but when we're trying something new, to me, it's, you know, did we get engagement? Did people respond? Did we get did people answer our poll questions? So those were some, for me, what I was looking for, because this was something new and different. So I didn't expect it to outperform other things we're doing right out of the gate. So it was more about, did we, you know, we made some connections with other organizations that were excited about it. So that was great that we made these partnerships that we can go back for again. We did get, to me, a really good number of responses to the polls, because I'm one of those people who, when you do an event, I'm like, what if nobody shows up? So, you know, once we hit 20 or 30 responses, I'm like, hey, people are at our party, woohoo!
Yeah, oh gosh. I don't have too much to add on that.
That's great. Any other last questions?
One other thing I'll say is we will do this again. You know, our thought on bandwidth is trying to do one a year and figuring out kind of what is that right topic. And we don't know what we're doing yet for 2020. We're starting to think about it, but I think doing more than one a year would be a really heavy lift when you think about the work that goes into it. But it's definitely something that we will do again.
I have one last question that came in. Somebody asked if you could talk a little bit more about confrontational responses. I know that you had mentioned that there were some players you already knew may jump in the conversation. When that happens, how do you deal with that? What's your strategy to keep the conversation on the track you want to keep it on?
With that particular group, we largely try and ignore them at this point. The particular 9/11 group, we will sometimes answer factually and direct people back to like our FAQ page about that particular issue. So we try to keep it very factual. We try to direct them back online to resources or direct them to take the conversation elsewhere. Sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not.
We didn't get too many for this particular event.
Yeah, we didn't on this one. We've seen it on some other things that have been going on where they try to jump in and say, well, of course you can't trust NIST. They lied about 9/11, so of course they lied about everything. And again, we largely at this point try to ignore them. We've learned that you cannot engage this particular population in a productive conversation online. So we will respond factually until we hit a point where it's very clear they're just going to keep coming back at us, and then we decide at that point when we need to stop engaging.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, everyone, if you'll please join me in welcoming Jessica, Sarah, and Terry from the Internal Revenue Service. They're going to be talking to us about developing engaging content.
Good morning, everyone. Hi there, I'm Terry Lemons. I'm Chief of Communications and Liaison at the IRS, and my unofficial title at the IRS is Chief Cheerleader for Social Media. We've had an interesting journey with social media at the IRS. We have a unique relationship, unlike any other government agency, with people across the country, which has created some interesting challenges in the social media space. You know, and for instance, you know, hopefully all of you all are ready for tax season. I hope you all get a great refund quickly. And our social media team here, Sarah, Garen, and Jessica Brown, will be helping, you know, get helpful info out to everybody. One of the things that we've tried doing with social media, and they'll be touching on, you know, if you go through history, the tax guy has never been popular. I mean, we've been vilified throughout history. And social media has been a bit of a challenge for us at times, you know, two-way engagement and things like that. But what we've really found is that, particularly through platforms like Instagram and Twitter, we've been able to kind of gently poke fun at ourselves and the image of the tax agency. And Sarah and Jessica are going to talk to you a little bit about that, and then we'll be happy to take questions. With that, let me pass that off to Sarah.
Thank you. Oh, can I get this one? Hi. So we're going to be sharing what has worked for us. That's not necessarily what's going to work for you. You're going to see some things here that you're going to say, there is no way my agency is going to buy into that. We're just trying to bring in what has worked for us and what could potentially work for you. And maybe there's something in there, like a little nugget that you can take home and use on your own. So what are we doing in social media at the IRS? One of the main things we're doing is building trust. And that's actually a post that we did that it's related to tax reform and to family medical leave. So we're becoming a source of information, but we're also approachable, maybe not at the very moment, but when the taxpayer is going to need an answer, they will know that they can come to us. When they have an interaction with the IRS, they'll think, well, I've seen their stuff. They're not these horrible monsters, so I can actually work with these people. So we are trying to change behavior. We were saying about changing the way people act or whatever, or would take action of their taxes, but it may not be at the very moment. Frankly, we don't expect people to be there with all their tax documents on their Twitter account. So if we don't get a whole lot of click-throughs, or if we don't get a whole lot of like people actually share this information, we're still okay. What we want is to have that message kind of like stay with them. So whenever they are ready to actually take an action, we will. And the pineapple is I don't know if you knew this, but I learned it. It's in some platforms, it actually means that your status is complicated. So we're like, that's not an option in your tax return.
With taxes, everything is complicated. So I think we need a lot of pineapples this tax season.
So why are we doing this? Whether you like it or not, you're going to need tax information. The thing is, if you're shut down and you don't want to hear about it, we can't talk to you, right? So we're trying to open a little window or have some room so we can get those messages across. We have some major ones like scam alerts. People actually need to know when it is the IRS contacting you and when it's someone just taking advantage of you. We have tax law changes that actually affect people, whether you like it or not. It doesn't really matter. It's still going to affect the way that you treat your tax return that year. And then we have the regular announcements and deadlines and taxes.
Okay, so a little bit about how we create our engaging content. We know that visual content is what gets the most engagement. So we invest a lot of time and energy into creating our graphics. When you're on like Twitter, there's a constant source of information. And so if you don't have a visual graphic to grab somebody's attention, your content could get lost. And we find that we're competing with billion-dollar industries and NASA, and we don't have space to get people. So we put a lot into, and we take our disadvantage into to be creative, stay relevant, and kind of friendly with people to get them to notice us.
So no one wants to see a post of a tax one?
No, nobody wants to.
No, not us. Right.
So something that has worked for us is to do the unexpected. Say, for example, this post. You wouldn't think IRS in Woodstock, but for this post, we made a connection with the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program, which was celebrating their 50th anniversary, along with Woodstock's 50th anniversary. And it got, some engagement from there. We had taken some risk, and one of the risks that we took, we posted some pests, some bugs, specifically a tick. And we realized that visual content did not sit well with people. It wasn't received well because it wasn't friendly, it wasn't fun. And so we've learned from that failure. And then also one of the other things that we do get leadership buy-in, as you can see. Yeah. So for us, we don't necessarily expect people to take an immediate action when they're on their platforms. So we try to create friendly URLs for our graphics so that they can possibly maybe remember it for later use. Say they're somewhere and they see this post, they might be like, oh, that's easy. I can just go straight to that.
sorry, and that's like exempt organization. So while for the most of us that means nothing, for an exempt organization it actually does. So they will know to go there. Sorry.
We've also started using a call of action to say, save this. So maybe they'll save it to their Twitter feed or to their Instagram favorites and go back for later use. Another thing that has worked for us is that we've learned that everything doesn't have to be short. Sometimes you can use graphics that have informative content that's comprehensive and useful. These types of graphics help reduce like phone calls, alert taxpayers to scam alerts, things like that. But it gets all the information out there so they don't have to go back to our website and look for what they need.
One of the things, if I could just jump in there, that's interesting about the IRS is that we've got a very diverse set of audiences. We've got average taxpayers, people like you, but we also have very technical audiences out there. The last slide, Jessica mentioned the exempt organizations group, very technical. Same thing with this one. Tax professionals, these are CPAs, enrolled agents, tax attorneys, that sort of thing. Big data threat against them. They're a target for identity thieves. So one of the things we've discovered with our social media work is not only do we need to be putting it out, we've also engaged in education with our tax practitioner community because they aren't very social media savvy. So the detail-heavy graphics like this basically are helping as part of our education effort with the tax pro community.
The other thing that is a priority for us is making people comfortable. And so friendly material is really key for us. So we try to shoot to make people happy and do things that make you feel happy. So take bright and colorful graphics or round shapes, open smiles, bubbles, confetti, blue bicycles, ice cream, things like that make you feel happy. We try to incorporate that in all of our graphics. And there's not a happier place than Sesame Street. So this kind of told people about Schedule C.
We posted that for Cookie Monster's birthday. So how do we do this? Part of it is we make it friendly. So we try to be lighthearted, and we completely get, especially for IRS, we can't really be funny, because there's nothing funny about not being able to pay a debt, for example, or there's nothing funny about, having an audit coming up. But we can poke fun at ourselves. Some of the things that we have to do, because that's the way taxes work, are really complex. So last year, or the year before, we had like this huge push for people to check their withholding, and we call this campaign Paycheck Checkup. So Paycheck Checkup for some of us with an accent is really hard to say. So we started playing along with the tongue twister of how much wood would a woodchuck chuck. So we went around and we did a whole lot of postings with the woodchuck around like how you do a paycheck checkup. This is one of my favorites. So this was for extensions. So we reframe something, because if you hear a message too much, yeah, there is something that will sink in, but there is also the fact that you start blocking it. So if you post it a different way, I assure you people were like, the people that actually got to see it were thinking, why on earth would the IRS be posting about hair extensions, right? So that's where it ties it with the message. And Jessica mentioned earlier that we try to put our URL, a friendly URL, with every post that we do. So what we've been doing in Instagram, we like you guys, we don't have a budget to be paying for having that system that you can keep the URL up. So we do a second photo, a second posting within the same, or a second image within the same posting that includes the URL. So this was one of our earlier attempts at doing that. And this is our Hamza post in Instagram.
The other thing that we do to create engaging content is the use of hashtags. We typically identify hashtags early in our planning process We try to find popular hashtags, social media holidays, and just things in general, because we're trying to reach all taxpayers, not just the ones that are looking for tax information. So say there's somebody for Shark Week looking for hammerheads. They might come across our post and say, oh, well, I didn't know that I needed this information, but I got it as well. So we try to use a decent amount of hashtags, especially for Instagram. Twitter, we limit to about 3.
2 or 3.
Yeah. And then we do have our hashtags for tracking purposes as well.
We put hashtag IRS on everything.
Here's another hashtag post.
Hope it works.
It's not working.
There you go.
The other thing we try to do is to stay relevant, stay on top of trending topics, fads, and popular culture. With this post, one of our teammates is a huge Star Wars fan and was really excited about the release of the movie. So we used her strengths in writing this post to get a really important message about getting ready for the tax season. Some more examples of staying relevant. We used the #1 song of 2019, Old Town Road, for this post about a key tax reform provision. And then the She Shed, which was a commercial everywhere that everybody knows about, fire awareness and keeping track of your records.
So disaster preparedness.
Yeah.
You'll also notice in some of these, not only are we trying to play off the image and the popular culture, we also, we kind of have a fondness for puns, some of which I may be kind of encouraging occasionally. But, all of this, for me, it's not just the images, but it's also the text. You need to kind of project a feeling of lightheartedness as well as sharing information. And, if you see in some of these, you're kind of getting the sense of what we're trying to be a little playful with it. So. And here's another example of that.
Yeah. So we did 3 posts during the Game of Thrones finale. We did 3 posts that weekend because we knew that was going to be really big and get a lot of engagement. And so this post was telling people about paycheck checkup. And I think it really worked.
Yeah.
Yeah, with these.
So we got all over the place with this one, and people were super happy about it. You're getting a cat sleep.
Sorry. The moms out there know, Frozen was big when the movie came out. So this was another post about that.
That's true.
More staying relevant. And then we have the Popeye's chicken sandwich, and we let people know that there's an abundant amount of tax tips, but maybe not enough sandwiches out there for you.
So some things won't work for everybody, right? So I just saw someone like say, what is that? But some of your content will reach very specific audiences. So this was meant for the Latino community to get tax tips. This is the image that you connect, or the heart with the antenna is Chapulín Colorado, and Chapulín Colorado is a huge funny character that every Latino out there has grown up with because it was in every TV channel out there. So even if your content is not going to reach every single member of your audience, it may reach those that need to see it. So it will be valuable to a few. So for this, we usually have a challenge engaging Latinos in our posts, or Spanish speakers, I should say, not just Latinos. This did really well compared to other stuff we have. What does it actually say? So it makes fun of the language that Chapulín Colorado uses. So if you haven't filed a tax return, or you have a pending debt with the IRS, or you don't know whether you will have a refund on the next filing season, or if you will have to pay, don't panic. and then he messes up his word, so he says it messed up. So IRS has all the tips and the resources that you will need to keep up to date with your tax obligations. So for this information in Spanish, and we use like, may the good ones follow me, which is what Chapulín says, and go to click on the link on the bio. So, oh, that's so it makes a huge difference on where we're using this information. And this may be super basic for us, right? For you guys, I'm sorry. But for example, we're not going to put the same content on Instagram that we do on Twitter, than we do on Facebook, or that we do on LinkedIn. So your audience really does matter, and we try as much as we can to tailor to each one of the audiences we have. So for example, for Facebook, Brittany's out there. Hi, Brittany. So for Facebook, we focus a lot more on the writing. So the image is something that it's an introduction to the content that will come along. Or we use an infographic, so it's a lot more text heavy. For Instagram, people are definitely looking at the picture first. Once they're hooked, we'll try to get them to move on to the caption. Twitter is the way that Terry describes it, is like it's a river, so it's constantly flowing. So if you don't catch someone right away, you lost them, it's gone. So for Twitter, we are constantly posting. We do 30 posts a day, and we have images that are bright and usually are heavy on text, because they're probably only going to see that image. And LinkedIn, we just do LinkedIn a couple times a day. And we do a lot of recruitment efforts on LinkedIn. That's true. So this is a kind of sample of something we did for Instagram. And I wanna point out that we did it before the nationals. This was super popular, and this kind of took us by surprise. But as Jessica says, everybody loves cranberry. So it didn't matter how you sliced it. Was our link there to the cranberry. This is the third Instagram sample, and this is a story which is something we need to explore a whole lot more. But it was we're trying to catch a maybe not necessarily younger audience, but people that won't think of applying for a job at the IRS. So this was a different approach to recruitment for us.
And one thing we do know is that people tend to post to the stories more often on Instagram than they do to their actual feed.
Yeah.
So, and people are clicking through their story all day. So we want to try to get into the stories more often to catch those people who don't necessarily look at their feeds.
This is now moving on to Facebook. So this is the type of image that we use on Facebook quite a bit. So you will have tips listed or something that the person can use that will stop and actually look at it or share it, because it's a lot easier to share on Facebook than it is on LinkedIn. But if you notice, we'll still use the bright colors, we'll still use the rounded fonts, that kind of thing. These are all their Facebook samples. I love that dog. These are our Twitter samples. So we keep that humor. For the most part, we try to keep the bright colors, the friendly image. But if you notice, our images here still have the URL, but also include a message on its own, so they can stand alone. We try this as well. We use the top one for World Kindness Day. And we do the same thing that everybody does. It's text heavy, but it includes a whole message. We included this one because we may not always have a single look for all of our messaging in each platform, but we will do it by campaign at times. So for Free File this year, for example, we're doing a message to reach different audiences, but they all kind of go together so that our partners can use them as well. So yes, it's not an error. So who is behind this? And us. And let me explain this. You saw So you saw Baby Shark, which frankly I thought when Brittany and Jessica came over with the idea of Baby Shark, I'm like, oh my God, we're gonna put a Baby Shark. I had no idea that this was an actual song at the time, because it was pretty early on. But they both have little kids, right? So they brought that from their personal life. You saw and I don't know if you saw in that flyer out there, my picture with my dog. It's a big part of my life. So we use that. We get the questions from our neighbors, from our friends of like, hey, so you work at the IRS, do you know blah? So we try to find the answer, and that's how we make some of the posts. We have Disney Addict, so there's for Frozen, or we have another one for partnerships that are husband and wife, or excuse me, spouses. We have a Mickey and Minnie post. We have a video gamers, so we put a video game post. We have pumpkin latte drinkers. So all of those things are reflected on our accounts because we bring our whole selves to work, and we're allowing ourselves, and our leadership is allowing us to be a little forward with our personalities in our posts. Like we said, we're trying to reach everybody, and the taxpayer is a lot like us. So they're watching the same things. They're drinking and eating the same things. They're laughing at the same things. So just encouraging you to do the same. There's also mine. Okay. So the results we've seen so far is that we've gotten a high visibility for our messages with a very low budget. We're going to put it that way. So we've had a lot of positive feedback from taxpayers. I don't know if you've had any dealings with IRS, but we don't get a lot of positive feedback from anybody. So taxpayers are actually making comments on like, they love this, or this was helpful, or they can use this. Or the media, we've had stories coming to us about us. Like, really? We have reached new milestones on several of our accounts, and we have 100,000 plus followers on Facebook, on Twitter, and LinkedIn. In the last year, 2 of our accounts grew by 50%. For us, it's a big deal.
Yeah, and I think the 2 accounts that grew by 50% is because we decided to take a new approach to those accounts by separating some of the messaging. And with Facebook, we made it more family friendly. We did our graphics geared more towards families, and is that how you would describe it? And we added more infographics, and we saw that growth just because of that.
So behind doors, the way we refer to Facebook is just like talking to an aunt. So that's the way that we do our posts. It's like the kind of pictures that your aunt wants to see or that wants to share. No, not a bad thing. So this is kind of where we are right now. We've reached 12,000 followers on Instagram in a year. We were ecstatic that was what we wanted to do. And I completely get that some of your accounts will be much bigger. For us, it was a big milestone. We're also on YouTube, and we're working on making that a little friendlier. We have several Twitter accounts, and they each specialize on an area. So these are some of the comments that we'll see. Again, for those comments to be made about IRS is super big for us. That was another one of the Game of Thrones one. Okay. We got a lot of comments about some fruits we posted. So if you have a minute, you can take your phone out and follow us right now. Thank you.
How are we doing on time? Have time for questions?
Yeah.
When you have a last name like Lemons, in my case, I've been very fruit friendly when it comes to our social media images.
I'm just curious if you've had any pushback I'll say from the legal side of things on using things like the Star Wars ones, or when you're imitating some of the logos of these or of these different pop culture things, whether your legal has had any pushback on you on your ability to do that.
So let me take a shot at that one. One of the advantages of our program, and this kind of goes into my role as chief cheerleader, we've set the program up. I'm SES, and I'm a direct report to the commissioner, and basically we've been able to set this up so that unless there's a serious question, we don't have the attorneys involved in reviewing this, which has allowed us a lot more creative leeway on it. So personal accomplishment. Now, the core information that goes into these is based off information that goes through our news releases, tax tips. Those do get technical review. So we've kind of had some leeway in there. On the external legal side, I'm an old newspaper reporter, so you've got some leeway there on fair comment and criticism. And we're not actually stealing images. We're kind of playing off the themes and all that. And I'm not aware of anybody complaining about it. And ideally, when you're in the PR biz, this buzz is a good thing overall. But no, we haven't had the the Disney attorneys swoop down on us on the Frozen things or the Star Wars references or anything like that. But just as importantly, from our standpoint, our internal attorneys have not come after us. So.
Yeah.
I mean, when you did the Sesame Street one, you still hashtag Sesame Street, but you were giving them credit, even though you were playing off of it.
Yeah.
And we also, for example, we won't use a picture of Princess Leia, but we may put the buns on the URS logo, which is a whole other issue. But yeah,
Hi there, Bridget Surchak, DOA. I was kind of following up on that because I thought you said you had heard you had used a song, and so royalties and things like that, was it just a portion or just a few notes of it, and then things like Popeyes and other commercial things?
So we don't use music for anything because of that, but we made a reference to a hashtag, and the hashtags are out there. So what we're saying is, this one was about opportunity zones. So in the Old Town Road, you will find, I don't remember the language, but take your horse to the opportunity zones and you will find whatever. So it's that kind of reference, but none of them had music.
Good morning. My name is Tracy Badacon. I'm with ATF DOJ. And you mentioned that some of the content that you have, it's segmented out for different types of audiences. Did you use market research? Did you have data analytics to come up with that type of segmentation for your content?
So like I think both of them already mentioned, we're basing this on our bigger communications effort. So we don't do that specifically for social media, but for example, on Free File, we know that the audiences that qualify for it, or for EITC, we know we do have research on who's more likely to qualify. So we base it on that kind of research, not specific to social media. I mean, we'd love to, but there's only so much you can do.
Hi, I'm JR with United States Marine Corps. Question, you have a large audience, different economic statuses, different platforms. What tools are you using to do sentiment analysis?
We're not.
So I think we've looked into doing some sentiment analysis. We looked at, what was the program? Hootsuite, the paid version. And we know that our sentiment is mostly negative. Right.
We're the tax people. Come on.
Right.
And that's part of where, part of us, honestly, is just kind of seat of the pants. We can tell when something's resonating or if we've got an issue out there. But for us, and this is a little different in the private sector, but the thing is for us, if we're having a good tax season, if the refunds are going out well, we're not having any processing issues, sentiment's going to be a lot better. And for us, we've got so many fish out there. We have more than $2 billion in unmet IT needs at the agency. So for us, doing that kind of analysis on our social media, we'd love to do it, but as Sarah was saying, we basically really don't have much of a budget beyond our staff. So but we can tell what's going on.
And we do social listening as well.
Yes. And by that, we mean, just because it freaks out some people, we're paying attention to the comments about iOS. We're not specifically listening to specific taxpayers, just for the record.
And that social listening is important to us. One of the things that we do, particularly as we get into tax season, I mean, we sit down with the business, with the people that are working the call centers and all that, and we pair that up with some of our traditional, old school media relations, and basically we kind of are able to kind of compare trends with what we're seeing. Because sometimes we will see out in social space an early indicator that we're having a problem with a specific form or people are having an issue. So, sitting down with the call center folks allows us to kind of A, get a handle on the problem, and then B, if there's a communication solution through social media or some other channel, we're able to do that.
Could you tell us more where you're getting your graphics from? Do you use Shutterstock, or for example, the Popeyes sandwich? Did you take the picture yourself, or?
So we just recently switched to Shutterstock, but we were using Getty Images. So they're all stock images that we have, but we edit them to make them our own. We do a lot of editing and, just trying to make it look less stocky.
So it's just stock images with our logo, and someone just made that comment on Twitter. They just put stock images with our logo. Yes, we do. But what we're trying is to turn it around. So our tools are basically a stock photo account with a limited access to images and Photoshop. That's it. Good? Oh no.
Sorry, my name's Jen Montooth. I'm with NHGRI. I was wondering what your workflow process is like what steps you take for approval and who's doing what.
It's messy. So what we do is right now, we have a list, literally a list of all the messages we're going to be doing between January and May. And we will build upon the rest of the year, but that's our biggest season for right now, right? We also have a calendar of all the dates that we want to mark. For example, we have a cake day coming up, and it's going to be with Free File, you can have your cake and eat it too, kind of thing. Have a good image. So what we're doing here is first we have the topic, and we select images throughout the year that we want to use at some point, and then we make the connection between them. Not necessarily, there's no particular order. So, for example, we're looking to mark Selena's passing this year. We don't know yet what message we will use with that, but we will make the connection with something that is appropriate. We know that we are going to do a lot of free file messaging, so we're going to make that match. Once our team, the social media team, puts it together, we send it for review to leadership and to the business units to make sure that we're not making stuff up. Thank you. Yeah.
To follow up on that, when you are playing off on some of these popular culture things, such as the Frozen movie and things like that, have you looked ahead to make a guess, or do you respond quickly to those? So in other words, when the movie Frozen, I mean, you wouldn't know in January that Frozen was going to be a big deal, or would you know? Later in the year.
We knew.
Maybe some of us wouldn't know.
Right. For something we know.
Are you also responding to trends more quickly than that?
Yeah, like the sandwich. Yes. Yeah. And we try to make it as fast as possible. It doesn't always work out that way, but we tried to make it as, for the sandwich, we wanted to do it a week before we actually did it. And we were nervous that it would be too late, but we needed to find the right message, we needed to find the right graphics, and we need to get approval. So it takes a minute for all those things to line up. There's some things we can do way ahead of time. Star Wars, we knew way ahead of time the release date. It didn't matter how bad or good the movie was, it was going to be a hit. So we planned ahead for that.
And we just did a Matrix post.
We did a Matrix post.
Yeah, and Matrix is not till 2021. We try to keep it ahead.
But we've got some spontaneity there, and kind of go back to the Game of Thrones image with the dire wolf with the dog in there. I mean, that was one I was kind of pushing them a little bit on. That was literally over the space of a week where there was buzz about Jon Snow not petting his direwolf. So we got it out the next weekend before the premiere. So basically, we've got some flexibility, and that's one of the advantage of our kind of guerrilla warfare approach to social media is we are able to kind of move pretty quickly if we see something, if one of the staff has a bright idea. So, you know, again, I mean, and I think that for me, one of the reasons why our program has been successful is that we've had room for our staff to be creative, to take some ideas, take some chances. And, you know, it's, you know, they've had to kind of push us a little bit on some of these. And, but, you know, overall, I mean, we've tried to create an atmosphere that created innovation. And, you know, part of that is like staying tuned in to what's going on out in popular culture and playing off some of this.
On that, I just want to say one little thing. So Terry just mentioned like staying tuned into what's going on in popular culture. It's not necessarily that we're using like all this research or doing anything. It's just the things that we are paying attention to. That's all.
Yeah. I think we do some research as well. A little bit.
This is Ariana from the National Security Agency, and as another organization that is historically disliked, what do you guys do? Do you guys purposely try to combat the negative narrative that has been created for your agency, or do you just post things and hope people start to like you?
So we do both. We do a lot of hoping they like us. But for example, if there's myths going on, when we are listening every year, we hear a lot of negative myths or things that are rumors out there. So for example, for this year, what we have planned is like we have Bigfoot, we have, forget the name of the rabbit with the horns. So we have a series coming up with common myths for the IRS to try to debunk them. And we're launching it on Debunk Day. There is such a thing as a Debunk Day.
I think when you're talking about image of an agency like IRS and NSA, I mean, you're not going to talk your way to a better image.
Yeah, no.
And I'm the PR guy, but for my view is, it's the business ultimately. And, what social media does should be reflecting the business. And for me, the agency's image is going to do better if we're actually delivering, if we're getting refunds out timely, if we're handling audits appropriately, if we're answering the phone. And what our social media, platform really should be doing is kind of amplifying, making sure people understand where they can get information, things like that. So, ultimately, this is about, the business of the IRS, collecting revenue, funding the nation, things like that, and less about trying to improve the image of the agency. It's more about, we're very outcome focused for what we're trying to do. And I feel your pain over there. It's, when you're one of the acronym agencies, it can be a real challenge out in social media. Yeah.
Riley at NIST. So when it comes to those longer form graphics that are kind of text heavy, how do you handle accessibility and alt text in that situation?
We knew that. So we planned for this question because it's been such a challenge. What we try to do is, and it's not available on every platform, is incorporate text, right? It's not foolproof, and we've been working with our Federal Aid Compliance Office forever. We also always include a link, so it's not going to be only the graphic, but it is a challenge and a half. So I can't give you a straightforward answer other than that. We work on it.
I have a question. Do you guys run the same content across all of your platforms? Or do you choose some, like where did chicken sandwich go? Did that go across all your platforms, or was that just Twitter?
Which one?
Chicken sandwich.
So chicken sandwich was only Instagram.
It was on Twitter too. I saw it.
Mm-hmm. So it may have been that someone else posted it.
Okay.
And that does happen a lot. Okay. Or we do get a lot of our, especially our Facebook posts get reposted onto Instagram a lot, but we keep them separate for the most part. We did use, for example, the Game of Thrones posts. We did them across platforms because that was all over the place. So it depends, but for the most part, we keep separate lines.
Okay. And do you run the same? So, for example, for your chicken sandwich, did you run that more than one time, or was that once only? I guess maybe for Twitter, do you run images more than once, or just one time and that was it?
For Twitter, we run them 1 million times. So there's stuff from last filing season that we're still running on Twitter. We do that a lot because we're putting 30 posts a day or more. There is no way we can create 30 images a day forever. So we do them over and over. We also have known that different people are logged in at different times. So we don't expect the same people to see it. And we don't expect the same people to see every single message we're posting. The other ones we treat a little different. So for Instagram, most of that stuff is used once. But we will, every once in a while, for example, for Hamburger Day, we reposted a hamburger post into our stories. So we repurposed a post, not necessarily reused it. For Facebook, I don't think we've ever reposted something.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else? Last chance for a question. Anyone else? Okay, we're going to go ahead. Thank you, guys. Hey, everyone, welcome back. If you guys want to please have a seat. We're going to go ahead and get the second session here kicked off. And just as a reminder, we have a couple more, 3 more presenters, and afterwards we'll have a little time built in at the end if you want to do some in-person networking. Next up, we have Laura Larimore, the U.S. Patent and Trade Office.
All right, so I'm excited because I can tell that everyone has really good energy after that break. I'm going to be talking a little bit about storytelling, and my name is Laura Larimore. I'm the Senior Digital Strategist at the United States Patent and Trademark Office. In a nutshell, we issue patents and register trademarks, and a lot of our customers are inventors and entrepreneurs and creators who want to protect their intellectual property. We are a very old agency. The ability to grant patents is actually in our Constitution, which is really cool. We're very proud of that. And we were established very, very, very early on. And in fact, Thomas Jefferson was initially charged with these patents that came in that people wanted to have granted. He would take them home, he would look at them, and then he would bring them back to the office, and he would convene a group, and they would decide if the patent should be granted. So we have a long history of telework at our agency, and we say it started with Thomas Jefferson taking those patents home and then reconvening the group to decide to grant them. So we've been around for about 225 years. We recently had an anniversary. But I'm going to talk a little bit about storytelling because you probably hear a lot that storytelling is such an effective way of communicating. But also in government, we don't do a lot of storytelling, and maybe we should do more storytelling. And maybe you are totally on board with that general premise, but you're sitting here thinking like, Laura, how can I do more storytelling in my office? Because I've got a lot of questions about how to do it, or how are we going to staff it, or where am I going to find these stories and things like that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our office and the journey we've been on to increase the storytelling, specifically a new content type that we've been working on called Journeys of Innovation. And in the communications office, which is where I sit, we have defined our vision for our office as shaping the future by telling the story of American innovation. So we really wanted to reframe what we do. It's not about cranking out press releases. It's really about telling the story, whether that's the story of the agency, the stories of individuals, the story of people that we help. And we really wanted to focus on this journey of innovation content type. So these are just a few of the folks that interact with our office. We recently granted the 10 millionth patent. So, you know, many patents have multiple people on them, so 10 million times however many people are on those patents. We touch a lot of people in our work. And the people who come to us for the patents, for the trademarks, they also often have a really amazing story. So these are just a few people that we've highlighted this past year in our Journeys of Innovation. I'll talk a little bit more about some of them, but I'm just going to point out a few and you'll hear some more later on. So we've got some local folks like Port City Brewery. This is the butchers who started that brand. They have a patent. They have a trademark as well for a lot of their beer names, because that's a very important competitive advantage. You got a catchy beer name. People know to ask for that beer. We've got Lonnie Johnson, who's the inventor of the Super Soaker. Fun fact, he is also a former Fed himself. He worked at NASA. He was goofing around and he figured out how to shoot a stream of water all the way across the room. And he thought, that's really cool. What can I do with that? Maybe I'll make like a super duper toy water gun. And this is actually his prototype. We have Frances Arnold, who just recently won 2 years ago the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. She's the first American woman to be honored. So there's a lot of amazing people. And then there's people you probably haven't heard of, like this lady in the middle. This is Josephine Cochran. She invented the dishwasher. I'll talk a little bit more about her story. But she has a really fascinating story, and a lot of people don't know about it. So before I get started, we're not the only people telling stories. And even though maybe that's not the default in government, some people are doing it. If you haven't been to stories.usaid, I encourage you to go there. A couple years ago, I went to an event. They had these little handout cards. They were sort of square shaped, and they had some images with someone's name and a little blurb about their story and then the URL. And I went to the site. Do we have anyone from USAID here, by the way? Hey, awesome, awesome. I went to the site. Were you involved in this at all? Awesome. Who are you? Claudia, awesome. I talked to Nikki Corbett and Gregory Young and Alexis Fennell. So I collected this card. I took a look at it. I thought it was amazing. It's really inspiring. And I put it in my file of things to remember for later that I want to steal. And it took several years before we were ready to start talking about storytelling at our agency. And they were kind enough to get on a conference call with me and my colleagues and talk about how they go out and they create these. And so they've got a federal sort of project manager person, but they go out and they hire like National Geographic level videographers, and they will fly them to Cairo, and they will sit with that individual, and they will follow them around for the day. And the content is amazing. And there was no way we were going to be able to do that. So we had to think about how we were going to do it. And also say CFPB as well, if you have looked at any of their video content. Some of it's how to do things, you know, how to file a scam report, but some of it's really amazing, stories about veterans. Some of it will inspire you, but it'll also make you really mad that people are taking advantage of veterans when they're deployed overseas through, you know, scam loans and things like that. And aren't we glad that CFPB is there to keep us safe? So there's some folks who are doing it. We knew we wanted to, and a couple things came together to make it kind of the right time to do it at our agency. So, you know, I had that little card in the back of my mind, gosh, I'd love to do this. And a couple of years later, we had a new director, and he charged us with thinking about our homepage of our website as more of an inspirational and storytelling kind of place. Historically, you came to the website, and it was designed to get you over to the checklist of how to do a thing as quickly as possible. And he's kind of a storytelling guy as well, so he was always looking for stories when he would go out and talk to put into his speeches and things like that. And so we started doing some brainstorming. And this is our very highly technical Post-it board note. PS Post-its, the adhesive on them is patented. And the people who invented them are not Rami and Michelle. And the two guys who invented them are now in the Inventors Hall of Fame. So goals. So we wanted to talk about how could we have a feeling for people when they came to our website. How do we want to make them feel, right? Because there's a saying that says, people will forget what you say, but they'll remember how you made them feel. So they came up with a couple of different things. And we really wanted to inspire people, to take them from being inspired to then move on to keep inventing or innovating or protecting their intellectual property. We really wanted to encourage people. And we really sort of, as we talked about it, we talked about our role. And we said, you know, these folks are on a journey, and we just sort of like come in at one part of the journey, but we're not the beginning of the journey, and we're really not the end of the journey either, but we're like kind of in the middle, and we're really not the hero of this journey. It's really the people that we help with the intellectual property. So you can kind of see a circled, I cut this photo off poorly, but there's the word journey up there. So we kind of thought about what we wanted to do. So as we thought about what would go into kind of that main hero space of the website, we wanted it to be narrative storytelling, and we started to call this the journey of innovation, or JOI for short. And we wanted to also, before we even got started, talk about what would make a good journey of innovation and what we would not want to have in that space. Because we knew that this is the first time we'd done storytelling, and it was on the homepage of high profile real estate. People were going to come to us and they'd say, oh, you know, I got this great story. You know, the CFO is this amazing person and they're doing X, Y, Z. And we wanted to be able to tell quickly, is that something that would be right for journeys of innovation? Or is that something that, no, you know, it's a great story, but it's just not right for this kind of space and what we're trying to do. So these were some of the criteria we came up with. And the main thing is we really wanted to create these in a way that encouraged people, that people saw in these stories, sometimes of very inspiring people like a Nobel laureate, they saw commonalities. So as we were crafting them, we were looking for elements that are very common. If you are an inventor or an innovator, you have experienced failure. You have had something happen that didn't turn out the way you thought it was, and then you had to adjust. You had things that were really challenging, maybe even for several years, you had to persevere. Those are all kind of common things that people experience. Whether they are ultimately very successful or not, you have to go through those things if you're going to be successful. So we really wanted to set up these stories around some of these very common themes and make the way that they're written and the way that we present the individuals very approachable and relatable, so people can say, you know what, I've been there, that has happened to me. It makes me feel better, it makes me feel inspired, it makes me want to keep going to know that the inventor of the Super Soaker, it took him 7 years working on his prototype before he was able to get it to the point where he could commercialize it. And by the way, part of that time he was working after work at his federal job. So we were creating these stories. We knew they were going to be pretty in-depth, and we wanted to make sure as well we got as much bang for the buck as possible. So they show up on our homepage. This is an example of one. This is a story for Josephine Cochran, the woman who invented the dishwasher. This is actually a vintage ad of the dishwasher from 1950s. If you click on our homepage, the story runs for a month. If you click through, you get a longer piece all about that individual. In this case, it's historical, so there's a lot of historical imagery. She invented the dishwasher. She took it to the World's Fair. The World's Fair, they had all these different food vendors. She convinced several of them to purchase the dishwasher so that they could easily wash plates quickly and get back to the business of serving their customers and making more money. And then after the fair, she won a prize at the fair. After the fair, she wanted to try to market this invention. She was a widow, her husband had died, she really needed a way to earn money. But the problem was the dishwasher was very expensive. It's a humongous room-sized thing. And it really worked best. It cleaned a lot of dishes really fast, but it could clean 300 dishes in 5 minutes. Most people at home don't need to clean that many dishes. And they don't have that much money to buy an expensive fancy machine, but a hospital or a hotel does. So in this story, we really tried to tell the story of Josephine Cochran, and most people don't know her story. And one of the things she said, it was a struggle her entire life to get people to respect her, to listen to her, and to believe in what she was trying to do. And she said that one of the scariest things she ever did, she's a very wealthy woman originally, so she did have some connections. She made a pitch to the Palmer Hotel, which is a very fancy hotel in Chicago. And I said, why don't you come down and talk to us? And she went down and she said, the scariest thing I ever did in my life, I was sitting in the Palmer Hotel. And you have to understand, in those days, a woman never went anywhere by herself. And it was the first time I'd ever been alone in a public place. And the scariest thing I ever did was walk across that lobby by myself. And she did. She got the contract. She made the connection to Palmer Hotel. And she continued to promote her business and sell these machines. And that's, to me, an amazing story that shows both how hard being an inventor is and also how far we've come just as a country in terms of really being able to allow many different people to profit from their innovations. So there's the individual story. After the story comes off of the homepage, it then goes into an archive. So what's nice is the work that we do for these stories, we get to reshare them at different times. So for example, something like the Nobel laureate, as we gear up for the Nobels, we'll probably reshare her story. So that it becomes kind of the gift that keeps on giving. And the other thing it's really useful for is social media. So right around this time, we're talking about the website redesign. We also have been discussing moving on to Instagram. Rightly so. Our social media specialist, Elizabeth Chu, like, we really need to get onto Instagram. And we're like, yeah, we do, but we're really worried about the amount of content that we're going to need to produce, because really we have only one full-time social media person. And we've got all the usual things that everyone else has, and it's a lot of content. So JOI became a really great secondary win, because we said, look, we can take this story, we can break it into 5 separate posts, and for 1 week a month, we can just focus on this journey of innovation story. And we've taken care of 25% of our content for the month, which now at least we've taken this new content load we're looking at doing and reduced it down to 75% of what it was originally. And this is super cool content, so we want people to read it, and we want people to see it. So we put it on the website. We put it on social media. We usually do like 1 or 2 posts on Facebook and Twitter, and then on Instagram the second week that it's out, figuring that maybe some people don't come to our website, they're just following us on Instagram. We'll do a whole week talking about it. We also do a mass email. We use Gov Delivery. It's called the monthly. It's like a roundup of all the sort of highlights in the IT space. But the lead thing for that monthly, and we were charged as well to redesign the monthly. We put it right at the top to drive more people to it. And then, as I mentioned, it's super useful for speeches or other activities. So this one's really cool. This is the inventor of the Desk Buster. And the really interesting thing about this is the initial technology, NASA needed tools for the moon. And they wanted cordless tools because they didn't want the astronauts to get all tangled up in cords. And so they charged Black & Decker with figuring out how to do that. And battery technology was very new, and they had to do a lot of work to figure out how to make lightweight cordless tools. And then Black & Decker had this technology, and they're trying to figure out what they could do to sell that technology back on Earth. And it's not a direct line. The story is very interesting. It's sort of like a bumpy road, but they realized that people really liked having these cordless handheld vacuums because vacuums used to be really heavy. You'd have to drag your vacuum out if you had a little mess, and you had to put the vacuum back. And they charged Carol Gantz, who was an industrial designer, with being the head of the team to figure out how to create a household vacuum, and particularly how to market it to women. And this is his patent drawing, actually. So we knew that the 50th anniversary moon landing was coming up. We knew that nobody could talk about that better than NASA. We are not NASA. But we do have a really cool innovation story, and we wanted to share it. So we timed the story to that event, and then we were able to reuse and re-push the story in physical events that we were doing around the moon landing. So although it seems like a really big lift to do narrative storytelling, if you're smart about it, you can take that initial content gathering that you do and actually really help it solve a lot of other problems, other content needs you have on different platforms. So this is our criteria for JOI. We're now getting to the point where we're able to talk to other people at our agency about what we're looking for. We're starting to plan for 2020. These are kind of the things we're looking for. Obviously, you know, if you're doing narrative storytelling, this will probably look completely differently because you're not focusing on patents and trademarks. But we wanted to have it be pretty easy for us to say, yes, is this person a good candidate? Should we pursue this? Or no, this isn't the right fit. Maybe put it in the file for some other purpose. We do 3 different kinds: historical, audio, in the field. Audio is we have a speaker series. People come to us. One of the people who runs the speaker series is like, gosh, these amazing people come. And they talk, and it's great, but is there more we could do? And we decided, yeah, we could just interview them in the 30 minutes before they come and talk, and like ask them some questions and just use like an iPhone and record it. And then we have these audio recordings. Like, these are really cool. We want to do something with this. And so that, knowing that we had those, we had a way of collecting those, that became the audio story. So these are actually, they're kind of like proto podcasts. It's not quite a podcast. You can't subscribe to it, but it is an audio. It has an audio player. You listen to it, and there's a transcript. And then in the field. And initially we thought we'd do 4, 4, and 4. The actual breakdown hasn't worked out quite like that. How do we do this? How would you go out doing this? I'm not gonna lie, it's a lot of work. But we really, really, really believe in it, and we've wanted to do it for so many years that everyone on the comms team is super committed to making this work. We now do bi-weekly meetings. At any given time, we have 3 stories in production. So we are polishing up the one that's about to go out the door. We're doing kind of like final writing on the middle one, and we're doing the early planning. And then we'll usually talk about 2, 3, 4, 5 months out and selecting those and getting those ready. So if you're more visual, this is kind of like what it looks like. So you can kind of see there's a writing component, there's a social media component, there's working with partners. Partners could be all kinds of people. It could be, sometimes it's the next of kin. We have a relationship with the National Mentors Hall of Fame, so we do feature some National Mentors Hall of Fame inductees. We've had to reach out to Smithsonian, Library of Congress, different people for some of the historical ones. But it's basically a 3-month process. They go up on the homepage for a month. After the first week, we start pushing them, secondary pushing on social media. They come down, but they live in the archive, and they're always there as a resource for us to reuse. So a good example would be Dr. Rory Cooper. He is both an inventor, a veteran, and also a para-athlete, para-Olympian. He has invented really great sport wheelchairs. It used to be if you wanted to compete, you know, the wheelchair they have was really big, it was heavy, it was clunky. It was not like a racing bike. It was like, you know, a tank and very hard. You had to push the whole thing to try to race. And he's invented a lot of these better wheelchairs. We featured him a while back. We did it in November, which is both Veterans Day and National Disability Employment Awareness Month. And we will probably re-promote that story when it comes time for the Olympics coming up. So again, this content, these stories, they're amazing. And it's pretty easy actually to look for additional opportunities to continue to push them at relevant times. And here's what we're doing right now, which we're very excited about. So if you go to USPTO.gov right now, we are featuring Herman Hollerith. Who all has heard of Herman Hollerith? See one hand. Do you work at the census? Used to. Okay. So I have to give the census credit because I went to like a social media conference and there was someone talking about census stuff, but he just like really loved history and he threw in this like fun fact of basically the census really helped give a real kickstart to modern computing in the United States. And he mentioned Herman Hollerith, and I just like tucked that away in my brain for later, like that's super cool. And so last year, the census was like, hey, you know, everyone in the federal government, we have a census coming up. We need your help. Anything you can do to help people take the census, to help the census go smoothly, to help keep it under budget, to help it, you know, make sure everyone is counted, let us know. And so we said, actually, we have this journey of innovation thing. And I know that Herman Hollerith has a patent. Maybe we could do something. So this is the first time we've partnered with the census. So we did all the research, we wrote the content. Census is super helpful in finding us historical images. They did do some like, you know, factual accuracy checking on this. But what's super cool is Herman Hollerith graduated from college. Like most college students, he needed a job. He was like trained to be a miner, but he got a job at the census because, you know, sometimes the recession in the 1880s, you need a job. And the census was getting really hard to actually tabulate because there were so many people in the United States. And he worked on the 1880 census, saw how hard it was to tabulate. It took him about 7 years. But the census gets done every 10 years, which means you only have 3 years to actually use that information, which is not good. So, you know, he thought about this and he thought there's got to be a better way to tally all these census things. And he looked over to Europe where they were using punch cards for looms. And he said, what if we use punch cards to tabulate the census? And so he basically developed this series of patents and machinery to do the punch cards, count the punch cards, and tabulate things. And the census was wanting to be innovative. They knew they had a problem. They put out a contest for people to come up with proposals that would be allowing them to do the census better and cheaper. And he submitted it and he won. And his device was selected and it was used to count the census. And then he went on to do more work in this sort of business calculating type space. And eventually, through, you know, he combined with other groups and blah, 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 eventually his company became one of the companies that eventually became International Business Machines, or IBM. So really cool story. Also, there's a census coming up. And you know what else is cool is not only did they innovate then, they're innovating now. So you can take your census online. The census takers, the people who come to the door, they're going to have iPad apps to do the counting. So it's a really cool story that we're excited to partner with on the census because there's an old part to it and a new part to it, and it's super relevant now. But also, if we can get all of our inventors and innovators excited about the census, that's good for everybody. And by the way, he did save the government a lot of money. He saved them about $3 or $4 million. I see a wow. That was not my reaction. I was like, rounding error, like whatever. No, $3 to $4 million at the time was about $150 million. So innovation is so important because it allows us to do things better, faster, cheaper, more accurately. Sometimes it saves us government money. Sometimes it just makes our lives better. But innovation is really important. I do believe that. So these are the JOIs. If you're interested and you have a cool inventor or entrepreneur story that you think we should know about, you want to partner with us on something, I encourage you to come see me at the end. But we are kind of on a 4-month schedule. We've started to create some collateral. This is a 1-pager. basically allows people to write up a kind of one-page pitch to us. We plan on using this as we go out to talk to our 13,000 employees because they interact with customers all the time. They sometimes hear stories that we don't hear. We do have IP attachés who are international. So while we might not be able to go to Egypt, maybe our IP attaché who's already posted in that area might come across an interesting story. But we create this kind of one-pager, and it just gives us enough to know, do we have all the components of a compelling story? And sometimes it's not, we don't, and it's not quite right for JOI, and we save it for something like a short tweet or a little, line in a post or something. This is generally what they look like in terms of stats. Again, this is Lonnie Johnson. This photo's a little better. So this is his actual prototype. He took a soda bottle, like a 2-liter bottle, and some PVC pipe, and he kept iterating on this prototype for about 7 years until finally this was pretty close to an actual Super Soaker, if you remember what they look like from being a kid. So this is him and his prototype. And we do track. So we use Google Analytics because it's on the website. Obviously, we use the usual social media tracking as well. We look for trends. It's still very early. We've only done about 15 of these. So Lonnie Johnson was super popular. We tried to figure out, why is that? It's a great story. Everyone knows the Super Soaker. I think he also helped amplify it on his own network, so that certainly helped. He's an African-American man. It's just an awesome story, the story of the Super Soaker, and it's a fairly easy to understand innovation because it's a mechanical innovation. It's not like a complicated scientific formula or something. The other one you'll notice up there that has a lot of hits is Andrew Higgins. Has anyone heard of a Higgins boat? I see one hand. Okay, so a Higgins boat. You've seen them. You just don't know you've seen them. If you think of the movie Saving Private Ryan or any other D-Day type movie, they land on these boats and the front drops down and all the soldiers run off the front of the boat. That is a Higgins boat. The dropping down of the front that allows you to land amphibiously like that and have everyone get off really fast and then back up without getting stuck in the mud and the sand, that is a Higgins boat. And Eisenhower said it is what helped us win World War II. So we timed that very strategically to D-Day's anniversary. But it's a really cool story, and we got to work with the World War II Museum down in New Orleans. He was a New Orleanian inventor, and he was not a very good student, which I like to mention in the story because sometimes people see themselves in his story. He was basically a brawler. He basically just got stuff done. And when it came down to it, he apparently came in to talk to the Navy about why they should buy his boats. And he looked at all the other plans and he wrote on them this plan stinks, and then he just left. So he's kind of amazing. I don't know if I would like him if I met him, but I kind of think he's cool. So we look for really interesting stories, and we're always looking for them. So my hope is in talking to you about Journeys Innovation. I've demystified what storytelling might look like at your agency or how you might go about doing it. I hope I've inspired you. If you have something in your file and you're beating yourself up because it's been a year and you haven't moved on it, that's okay. Maybe it'll take longer. Maybe you're ready to move on it now that you've heard some new info. And I want to use the rest of the time for questions.
Hi. What publishing format do you use for your stories?
So do you mean
AMP stories?
So these are on our website. We use a Drupal CMS. So there are web pages that are built in Drupal. And yeah.
And for your archived stories, do you ever go back and update them, or are they just pretty much as they were originally published?
So we've only been doing it for 15 months. But I think the expectation is like a press release, they're corrected the moment that they were issued. The audio recordings, obviously you're not going to go back and change those. The historical ones, those are people who are no longer living, so you're not going to change those. The in the field stories, we would like to do more of them. We've only done a few. But again, my expectation, for example, I'll go real, I don't know if I have a picture of this. So we have these young folks who won the Collegiate Inventors Competition. And they were so excited. That was the kickstart they needed to decide when they graduated they wanted to found a business based on that innovation that they were recognized with the award. And they're out in Charlottesville. And so we went down to Charlottesville And they're at a very early stage, right? They're like 3 recent college graduates building a business. I do not expect that we will change that story. It was correct at the moment it was published, even if they, you know, maybe they go on to become the next whatever, maybe they don't. The story was correct at the moment it was published. Yeah.
Hi, that was a great presentation. I was wondering if, I know that you showed the workflow, but I was wondering if you could talk more about like who's doing the researching and writing and like the approval process.
Sure, okay. So this has been an evolving thing. When we started, like, so our office is not super, it's bigger than some, but not as large as other, or it is probably in the middle for agencies. So we have basically one person, so I'll talk you through this. Basically, anyone can pitch us a story. So if you come across in your travels an amazing story, feel free to get in contact with me, pitch us a story. We love that. And we say the same thing to people internally too, because we don't necessarily work with customers all the time, but other people do. So the one-page pitch, anyone can write that. Then the one-page pitch goes to kind of our editorial group. That's about 5 people in the comms office. You know, we've now designated someone to be sort of like the editor-in-chief of this product and make sure it like gets out the door on time. We didn't initially have that person. We were like, oh, we'll just all do it together. And that is not a good idea. Don't do that. Because I'm like, I think so-and-so's have one person responsible for getting it out the door. And I am the web person, and the web is usually the last step. So I then became the de facto, like, guys, when I'm supposed to update the homepage. So it goes to editorial board. Ultimately, it's the website editor-in-chief, like go, no go. She sets the schedule. Then we have to decide who writes it. That's been our biggest challenge. We just hired 2 folks who are writer editors, and they specifically are on the hook for, I think, 3 stories a year. But right now, the remaining stories are like, no, you're it, no, you're it, no, you're it. I wrote the Higgins boat story. You can probably tell by how passionate I am about him and all the weird facts I know about him. And my background I have no official writing in my title or background, but it had to get written, We did try interns writing. So this is the first year we did interns writing. This was also the first year we had first or second year law students. And law students are not comms professionals. So they gave us a great bibliography as a starting point for the research, but like the actual writing ended up being a writer in our office. The idea is basically the person who's writing it, you do the initial research, you do the initial draft, you also draft the social media plan. We have kind of a template. So like day 1, introduce us to who this person is. Day 2, talk about like their invention or like why they needed to invent this. Day 3, talk about, you know, something that was challenging or something that was unexpected that didn't work out. Day 3, talk about, or day 4, I think it's like talk about kind of like a breakthrough. Day 5 is talk about like major impact, like bigger scale. And you can kind of like drop that out even if you're not a social media person. We do have 1 full-time social media person, so they review those. But basically whoever signs on to write is going to be tracking down the images, writing the story, basically drafting. And then it'll go to an editor for editing. And when we launched, we did not have a Drupal infrastructure for these. It was all HTML pages. So we had to use our IT folks to build them, which we had to do it because we were on a deadline to get the website out the door. It took us about a year. So only in the last 3 or 4 go-rounds have we been able to create these pages ourselves, but we can create them ourselves, and now it's so much easier. Because when your boss says, you know, I think we should add these 2 words to the title, you can easily do it and be like, that's 2 lines, and we only do 1 line, so that's not going to work. So that's kind of the structure. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Hello, my name is Jonathan Schaefer. I work for the National Park Service. I have a quick question for you about your pitch strategy. What have you found are the most effective ways to get folks in the organization interested in pitching you a story?
So this is the second time I've ever given this presentation. The first time was to an office in the organization. It's the office that does, it's called OPIA, because for the government we love acronyms, and Office of public, I can't even remember what it stands for. It is basically the group that goes out and has IP attaches, does a lot of the policy education work. They asked for us to come and like tell them how they could get in on this. So the very first time I gave this presentation was to that group. This is only the second time I've given it. We gave it one time as practice to the people on our team to be like, we're telling the truth about everything, right? Like, this is all correct, right? Like, you agree this is how this is. So the next stage is to go out and to encourage people. So I'm not at the stage yet where I have this nice backlog of pitches and I can tell you like some people are great or like look here for the perfect thing. I don't know yet. I would say our plan is just to basically do what we call the dog and pony show, where you just like go around, you give this presentation, you ask questions. People will bring their own ideas, but I fully expect people will also bring their own agenda of like, I have this cool thing. Okay, if I can find a person, then I can get on the homepage. I expect to have those conversations with people. That's only natural that they want to promote their thing on the homepage. But ultimately, it's about, is this individual person very relatable and appropriate for the criteria we've laid out. I saw two.
Good morning. I loved your presentation. My name is Benny Williams. I'm with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I do social media for the Fish and Aquatic Conservation Program at headquarters. I have two questions for you. One is, how do you know that you're not being too technical in your storytelling? So this is something I'm faced with all the time. You know, I'm looking at my demographics of my fans and followers, what level of education they had, you know, where they live. And it's very easy to be very technical, but yet at the same time to tell the story, you sort of have to educate these fans and followers a little bit with the genre so they can really appreciate the story that you're telling. So number one, how do you know you're not being too technical? And then number two, what platforms, and whether it be like on your webpage or on social media, do you think are the best platforms to present your stories? Thank you.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So one of the things I've noticed, I've been at the Patent and Trademark Office for about 5 years. So to become a patent examiner, which is most of our employees, you need to have a background in STEM. So we're looking at a lot of people with like PhDs in very complicated technical things. And they need to have that level of technical expertise because they are receiving applications for patents that are very technical and very complicated, right? And they need to know, oh, you know, this thing looks like that thing, or no, this thing is totally new in the literature, et cetera. So the majority of our folks are very technical folks. And a lot of the folks who rise up out of the patent corps to become leaders, you know, they have that background as being really serious scientists. And the same thing on the trademark side, those folks are attorneys. So you need to be an attorney, which, by the way, if you know anyone in law school who's about to graduate, we hire every year trademark attorneys. And if you know anyone who's coming out with STEM, we are constantly hiring because we have, again, about 10,000 people who are those folks, those attorneys and those STEM folks. Most of them are the patent examiners. They know everything in and out. Sometimes in our office, what gets to us, though, requires many levels of kind of taking it up a level, taking it up even a higher level, taking it up to the like, let's pretend you're talking to a 4th grade class about this. One nice thing about working with our comms office, we do have some folks who have academic backgrounds in science and science writing and things like that. But we have some folks who don't. We have some people who are newspaper reporters. My background, undergrad, was in art. So if I can understand the story of what's happening, then chances are the general public can. For these, we're currently tracking the grade level of the writing. So we use Flesh Contagious as like a, hey, you know, on average, what's the grade level of this? And we do have an education group. So we've started to talk about, now that we have 15 of these and we're cranking out 12 a year, you know, next year we'll have 24 of them. The year after we'll have, 36 of them. So do we make a version that's designed for kids or early readers or people maybe like that need some simplified language to understand them? But we do try to write them in a very not complex way. So Francis Arnold, who won the Nobel in chemistry, I probably only understand about 20% of what that Nobel is for. but we tried really hard to get at least a one sentence, like very basic description. And I think that's a constant negotiation with our subject matter experts, because on the website, we see people write in when we have plain language writing. And I know there's going to be a talk about that in just a minute, because plain language is super important. Plain language goes for everything, goes for social, goes for web. But we get people writing into us when we have a page that's in really good plain language. And we get comments like, I'm a lawyer, and I don't need this to be complicated. I appreciated how clear the language on this page was. So I think sometimes people think that if it's very clear and easy to understand, somehow that you're dumbing down the expertise. But if they don't read it at all because they read the first sentence and it sounded like gobbledygook to them, then we're not really actually communicating. So it's a constant back and forth. In terms of what platforms, so we're on, you know, all the usual things, nothing exotic or fancy. Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, website. You know, there may be some pockets, like, I don't know, like there's some Reddit communities and stuff that I'm pretty interested in, where maybe you could be a bit more technical, and where we see this sometimes. We have a lawyer community. So I'm an IP lawyer. I live and breathe this stuff all the time. I don't want the one sentence. I mean, maybe I want the one sentence, but then I want like all the details, and I can understand all the details, and figuring out how do I give the general public a one sentence and then give people more info if they want like all the details, how to do that. I think it's a challenge for all of us. But yeah, we try to usually put links to more info in pretty much everything. So I know there was another question.
Hello. So since you're making a lot of content, double digits now, and there's similar themes and motifs, how are you avoiding making very like template-y narratives? Or do you see that as like a pro, I guess?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. So we got a little bit of a head start because we do have this partnership with the National Mentors Hall of Fame. And one of the things that they run that's really inspiring is it's called Camp Invention. So it's like a 1-week STEM inventing camp, and they're all across the United States. If you've got kids, starting to be time to look for camps and things keep them busy. There is a camp. There's probably one in your area. It's called Camp Invention. But they had this great poster where they had sort of to hang up in the classrooms, and it was like the building blocks of innovation. And it was like these various core themes that they had kind of identified, like perseverance, creativity. And we saw that poster and we were like, yeah, that really resonates. And there's like 25 of those building blocks. So any one story, you know, may have a main one and then like a couple of sub ones, but I don't think we're going to run out. Everyone's story is individual in its details. So, you know, you have someone like, this is Temple Grandin up here. If you've seen the Claire Danes movie, this is what Temple Grandin looks like now, recently. You know, she has autism. And so there's some specifics, you know, about how she kind of interacts with the world and how the world has interacted with her over time and kind of finding her place in the world. But at the core, you know, it is a story of perseverance and probably also a little bit of like neurodiversity is probably a good thing. But that story in its specifics is so different than Josephine Cochrane, even though you could say like they both struggled against something. We've had conversations about like, would we ever tell a story about an inventor that was super inspiring, but ultimately, you know, they invented this thing and just nothing happened. Like they're, you know, they went bankrupt, nobody made it, nobody, you know, like that happens. That is a real thing that happens. I think right now we're like, there's enough stories of people being wildly successful. Let's like stick with them for now. Because that's not the most inspiring story. Like they have this amazing thing and it was super hard for them and they lived in the middle of nowhere and then nobody ever did anything with it. Like that's the hard, I have enough other stories to tell. So I'm not worried yet. Like talk to me in 5 years to see whether it becomes like rote. The other thing is because we've got historical stories, we've got audio stories, and we have in the field stories. On one level, doing 3 different kinds of stories, we basically launched 3 different kinds of narrative products. It would have been a lot easier to just pick one and do one, but we knew we wanted to sometimes tell untold historical stories. We knew we had these cool people coming and willing to talk to us, and we knew sometimes that people were at early stage, we might have to go out to them. So that means we have 3 different kinds as well. So you've got, what are the themes? What are the formats? Every time we write one, I think we learn something new. And we're still learning and looking at analytics. The other thing I'll mention is because we built these in Drupal, and you could easily do this too if you have Google Analytics, our IT folks put Google event tags on these pages. So we can actually track, did people who came, how many people came to the page? Did they scroll through 25%, 50%, 75%? Like, are they persisting through the story? And that actually, back to this gentleman's point, is one of the things I was very interested in. Lonnie Johnson's story, this is an audio story. It's about 3 times as long as everything else. And the person who recorded it just absolutely loved all of Lonnie's stories. And he was really struggling to cut things down. And I said, look, it's getting really long. And he's like, no, but like, it's all so good. It's so good. So it is about 3 times longer. What we learned was if you make a, this is an analogy, but this is basically like making a 15-page paper when you were asked to make a 5-page paper. And if you turn in a 15-page paper, that is as much work as turning in 3 5-page papers. So for this one, we actually did 3 months of work for one story. And in hindsight, like it barely, like it was really rough. So sometimes you have stuff you really want to put it in. I did like try to push back to be like, this is going to be really big and really long. We've never done this one this long. And also, I think you're going to die trying to audio edit this entire story on this deadline. But he really, 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 really wanted to do it. So we did it. We put it out. And now we're tracking it, right? How many people are actually persisting? Will people persist? So his argument was like, hey, people will persist. If it's really good and it's 15 minutes instead of 5, people will stick with it. And I think what we have is so good, I want to keep it. But we now can have the data to track that. So if we start to see like, people start to piece out after X number of words, we'll start to not write them so long. I don't think that answered your question. I have forgotten what your question was. Yes, we're at time. So I'm going to turn it over to Gabby.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you to Laura. Hey, everybody, we're going to get started. Please help me welcome Catherine Spivey of Plain Language Gov. She's going to be talking to us today about using plain language for social media.
Yes, I prefer the handheld so I can wander around the room and peer over people's shoulders. I wanted to say that in marked contrast to the inspiring and educational sessions before, there are going to be very few pictures or graphics. I just wanted to, make it clear that if you're looking for graphics, avert your eyes for a few moments. But I wanted to talk about plain language in social media because it has always struck me how, I don't want to say limited a medium it is because I enjoy social media, a number of different ones, but how short the possible limit is for getting someone's attention. And if you're using, just for example, a lot of prepositional phrases, a lot of unfamiliar acronyms, it's just, people are like, oh, whatever, something else, next. And in particular, I consider this for Twitter because we have the division I used to work for, information technology category, uses primarily Twitter. And I've always thought of it as a series of postcards. Here's a postcard, here's a postcard, here's a postcard, and you can look at them, but sometimes you want the words as well. But you don't just want weather is fine and wah 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 wah, the Peanuts theme. So starting on this, I'm always going to start with the basics because I hate people who introduce a term and then never mention it. But what is plain language? And the definition of that is plain language, content is in plain language if your audience, this depends on your audience, not you. If they can find what they need, it's kind of hard to miss in a tweet, so thank heavens. Find what they need, understand what they find the first time they read or hear it. How many of you have ever read a tweet twice? Anyone? Few people. Yeah. It really should be straightforward. And the third is, use what they find to meet their needs. And that can be a need for pleasure, entertainment, history, as we saw, a number of different possibilities. But they have to be able to find it, understand it the first time and use it. So this is a list of techniques, and as you all very well know, you are getting the slide deck and the recording, so you don't have to write down all of these, just in case you're wondering. But you have to make it reader-centric. You have to design it. Now, that's a little more limiting with Twitter. Use short sentences, not paragraphs. Work on pronouns. You can really tighten up some language using pronouns. Use active voice. Do not make people stare at your tweet trying to figure out who's doing what. Focus on verbs. Use consistent terms. And use common and everyday words. So all of those techniques distilled for social media. Plain language is even more necessary than in longer content. You know, you've got a short period of time, people, and skim. So what you want to try is what I'm considering progressive editing, which is you look at it and you say, how can this be tighter? How can I lean my writing, so to speak? And when I saw this screenshot from someone I follow on Twitter, I thought, ha, there's my presentation. So there's nothing like getting something like that. So what she started with, and she's an editor in South Africa, and we connected with one another because we both dislike the word wardrobed. I know, social media, eh? But if you'll look at this, the sentence is, or the clause that she's looking at is likely to be reflective of the needs of society. Now be honest here. How many of you might actually tweet that, maybe, or put that on social media? Yeah. These things happen. But a way of tightening that, and it's a courtesy to your readers, a way to do switch that is, instead of to be reflective, likely to reflect. Tighter, stronger verb, fewer prepositional phrases, and she goes back and says, a further edit, instead of needs of society, society's needs. So when you're skimming your postcard tweet, you can have a tighter message, a stronger message, and make more of an impact. So that is your graphic for this particular presentation. And I was encouraged by people who should know better to do some more, some of this for GSA examples. And this is, as an advocate for small businesses, we exist to provide assistance, guiding, and training that ensures small businesses, raise your hand when you stop listening. Yeah. Small businesses not only get in the name. I tell you, I feel like a Peanuts cartoon, except what I'm saying is wonk, 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 wonk. So I looked at this and I thought, what can I strike out? What is sort of just blurring into government speak? So I addressed the small business owners directly. Small business owners were on your side. We advise and train you so you not only get in the game but compete on a level playing field. All I can say is it's better than this. And that's what it looks like. Could it be better? Obviously. At some point, does the tweet have to go out? Yes. Seriously, I've worked in a magazine. I know things, things are never perfect, but you just hope they're not wrong. And another one, and then this is my own, Tip Tuesday. The federal government is looking for, raise your hands again when you stop listening. The federal government is looking for small businesses who specialize in IT products and services. It's like, sometimes you just have to say sometimes, yeah, duh. So what? Yeah, I stand for the snarky in our social media followers. I'm looking out for them. So some of this, I moved to a hashtag, FedGovT, Fed Government hashtag. So tighten that. Not who specialize, the ones who provide it. used the usual thing for acronyms, put the acronym in a parentheses, and tightened it. So this or that. I'm like the optometrist here. This or that, you know. So you can always make it just a little bit better, a little bit tighter. Now, everyone starts with this. But, you know, with a little attention to plain language, you can move it a little forward. A little about hashtags, and I was so grateful for the previous speaker who spoke about hashtags because, you know, I thought I'd go a little basic here and say, why do you use hashtags? And they show you, they put you into a network of linked tweets, the ones that use that hashtag, so you can discover communities and perhaps new audiences. So, yay. But, oh, I meant to do this, dang. When you search on, when you don't click the right thing, I've broken it. I've broken it, Gabrielle. Look at me. Broken it entirely. Well, no. Maybe not. But, you know, when you search, you get a whole list of things that also use that hashtag. So I'm going to imagine that you can do that. And I have broken it. I can't find my slides. Yep, this is why I should never be allowed without somebody. Okay. There we go. Thanks. Save the day. So you can search for hashtags on your own, honestly. But you need to make them accessible. And I found out fairly recently that it's known as camel case. I have no idea why. I cannot explain that term. All I can do is say, this is what I've heard it called. So you capitalize each word so that anyone using a screen reader hears every word separately and not or whatever it could be. So, and it also emphasizes what the words mean a little bit better, because like one of the hashtags I've seen in my group is writing, not editing. But if you look at it, it looks like, if you look at it non-camel case, it looks like writing, note, diting. You know, if you're just reading straight, that's exactly what it words like. And that's an easy step to do for, you know, helping people who are using screen readers. But don't use too many. This is something I saw on Facebook as I was in my reenacting community, and I thought 4 lines of hashtags is just way too many. So be judicious. Make sure they're real hashtags. You know, make sure they will actually lead to something you like. So I have a list of resources that you'll be able to look at. There's some information on DigitalGov, a webinar from before, plainlanguage.gov for all the information you would want about plain language and then some. And what was also recommended to me was the CDC guide for writing for social media. So that might also be very good. Does anyone have any questions on plain language and social media? Yes. I don't think so, which makes that particular example even more sad. The question was on Facebook, do the hashtags lead to the communities? And I don't think so. What I'm tempted to think that it is ironic commentary. But don't do 4 lines of ironic commentary. You know. Be ironic, but be shorter, I think, is definitely. Sir, oh, you have your...
I'm asking this again. Have you ever been involved in the creation of a hashtag that became permanent?
I wouldn't say necessarily permanent. I did get the Plain Language group, the Plain Language Action and Information Network. We started using camel case for plain language. You know, at some point we may start something like Fed plain language. I don't know. Do you have a particular hashtag that you were wondering about, or a particular thing that you're facing right now that would require a hashtag?
Well, working with the Fish and Aquatic Conservation Program,
as you said, yes.
with the Fish and Wildlife Service. I'm also helping the National Fish Habitat Partnership establish their social media strategy with their top 10 waters to watch. And they're also gearing up for World Fish Migration Day in April. So none of them, we don't have a hashtag at this point, but since it's the beginning of the planning of this strategy, we could create within 2 to 3 years, I feel, a larger conversation that could then benefit even more followers or fans and expand our reach and engagement.
Is your question whether you have the power to create a hashtag? Yes, do it. You can start the hashtag. Don't wait for somebody else. Good luck with your fish. You might also consider, can you name specific fish, because that might open up to very specific audiences. I'm thinking of my brother-in-law who fishes something. But, you know, it's that sort of thing. The people who fish get very attached to fishing. Yeah. I was thinking, I think rockfish, and I don't know what they do.
Hi, Lori from State Department's TravelGov account. So what recommendations do you have for getting your organization to really buy in and practice plain language? I'm not sure if anyone else relates, but sometimes you feel like the lone crusader with a red pen and nobody really wants to be that person.
What do you mean?
So basically, like, how can you encourage your colleagues to take this seriously and get better at it, and what steps they can take to get better at it, so it doesn't fall on your shoulders too heavily?
That's two separate questions, but they're both wonderful ones. I always sort of quote the law, you know, Plain Writing Act of 2010. You know, and that is generally helpful. And then if that doesn't work, I quote user experience and customer service and customer experience, where you say, look, the audience doesn't know what this means. Or I go even lower and I ask my coworkers, do you want to get phone calls and emails about what this means? And usually the answer is no. So if you can short circuit any of that, you know, yay. The other thing is, how do you start proving the value? And that is tricky. I'm not going to say it's not, but most worthwhile things are. One book I can recommend is by a noted plain language lawyer named Joe Kimball, K-I-M-B-L-E. He has a book called Writing for Dollars, Writing to Please, with before and after and statistics on plain language working. So I mean, that is, I think, right now the best example. One of the things, I fell into that trap of being the plain language person, and I felt like, you know, this is not unteachable or unlearnable. So plainlanguage.gov does offer free training to agencies. There's a form on the website. And sometimes it's just saying, wouldn't this sound better? Now, sometimes my sneaky way of doing plain language editing is to focus on content design, which is breaking open those long, horrible, unreadable paragraphs that drive me to consume a great deal more caffeine than is strictly speaking necessary. And sometimes I work for that agency. So, you know, you're like, wait a minute, this has got to be easier. Can you break it into a list? Can you add some headers? Can you help your readers in some way? But I would also say that the best thing to look at is, who is your audience? What questions do they have? And that's where you get the phone calls, the contact center, you know, the call center, people responding to the email inquiries and say, what is your biggest problem? How can I help you solve it? And honestly, that's the best way of promoting plain language among your coworkers, is fewer emails and phone calls. You're totally allowed to have that business goal.
Great,
is there another question over here? In the interim, if you could just sort of, you know, interpret, dance your question, maybe not.
Perfect. Hi, my name is Katie Riley, and I work at the U.S. Army Public Health Center. We're doing a strategic effort right now called our Digital First effort, where we're trying to kind of transform our culture and our organization to take a digital first effort. And so plain language is one of our big initiatives for the next year or so. And we're wondering, do you have some initial first steps on how we could kind of implement a plan to make our whole organization use these concepts or kind of use a approach? We have a lot of different things we want to work on, but we're trying to find those kind of like quick wins. And how do we start moving forward?
The ever popular quick win. Again, I would look at what's the biggest complaint you get about, say, your website or letters you send out. Where are it's jargon, but what are your users' pain points? And figure out, you know, is it you need people to read it from the perspective of the user? Is it inherently confusing? Do you need training? Do you need to hire a consultant? You know, I know that sometimes plain language goes against the grain for a number of folks, although also many of those populations are huge fans of plain language. But I often hear, oh, our policy people will never go for that. Our lawyers will never go for that. You know, my boss won't like this. And sometimes you just have to say, look, here's the internal problems with this document. Here's the 3 directions you give. Here's, you know, here's how it's being presented, and here's the feedback we're getting, and anything you can do to stop that. I mean, think of you're benefiting as, again, your office not having to deal with explaining the same thing over and over again, and the users. They don't want to call you and ask what that they mean. They want to, you know, hopefully either do it or say, you know, this really doesn't apply to me, which is a different non-plain language issue. Does that help? Does that get you started? I would also take a look at plainlanguage.gov. There's a section on, I think it's training, that has a little section on starting your own program. And I should also add that the federal plain language guidelines are available on plainlanguage.gov as well, should you need something to point to when you say, you know, this is or is not plain language. Wow, that's so exciting. Hurrah. Yes. You know, this sort of mind meld works when everyone's, you know, working together. Very pleasant. Any other questions?
Hi, my name's Audrey Wellens. I'm from NIH. So my audience is generally cancer researchers, and sometimes I encounter the mindset of, oh, plain language isn't really that important for us because our audience is highly educated. Do you have a good rejoinder for that?
They wish, you know. They wish it would be the case. The thing is, and if you could get in touch with me afterwards at info@plainlanguage.gov, I can have specific resources, but I would look into health literacy, which is a big problem, and also academic writing, because what they're finding is that people don't read the research if they don't understand the summary. And so that there are gaps in a lot of knowledge because, you know, they look at one thing and they're like, oh, this doesn't apply to me because of what the summary said. And then it turns out, oh, yes, it did. And if you want a lot of entertainment and to easily learn something, Alan Alda, the actor, yes, started a Center for Science Communication at, I think, SUNY Buffalo. I'm not 100% sure on that. Stony Brook? Yeah, I get them confused because I have a friend at one and Alan Alda is at the other, and they just sort of blur. But he's not only providing information about how to explain science, which to me also includes medicine, but he was telling scientists, you know, he was very interested in science. He hosted that PBS show, you know, all about science, and he said he's just always been fascinated. But he had to tell scientists, you are not getting funded by Congress because they don't know what you do. And so he is trying to make it easier for scientists to get valuable funding. Also the whole issue of academic writing. You know, people who are expert in one discipline, it does not necessarily transfer to expertise in another discipline. And even medically, like just if you're, I'm making stuff up here, but just in case you're a brain surgeon, does not mean you understand heart surgery. They develop very deep, very narrow expertise, and it doesn't necessarily convey. I don't know whether they'll believe you or not, but I'll see if I can get you some more resources.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Anything else, or time for the next person? Thank you so much. I should also mention that we have a community of practice about plain language if you want to know more.
Thank you, Catherine. All right, everyone, we're going to get started. We have Rachel from the DC Homeland Security Office. I've heard this presentation already. She gave it in with like November, December, in the fall. It's great. You guys are really going to like it. This is a fascinating presentation on disinformation in social media. I'm going to hand it off to Rachel.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel DeLange. I'm an intelligence analyst with the National Capital Region Threat Intelligence Consortium at the DC Homeland Security and Emergency Management Agency. In short, I work for the DC Fusion Center. So if you're not familiar with fusion centers, they were created after 9/11. They're all throughout the United States, and the purpose of them is to promote information sharing from state and local government agencies, law enforcement, up to the federal agencies, and then vice versa. So we're sort of that conduit for information sharing. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to talk to you a little bit more about disinformation. And today's brief is broken up into 3 parts. So the first is really, what is disinformation? What's the definition that we use for it? Why do we care about it? Why are we talking about it? The next part is some of the technologies that are kind of changing the landscape of disinformation and are changing how we look at disinformation and why we worry about it. And the last part, and perhaps what I think is the most important part, is what you can do as an individual to protect yourselves and protect your agencies from disinformation. So I do have some videos throughout today's briefing. If you have any issues with the sound, we're going to try and make it work, but we'll see what happens. So just a caveat for that. So the first thing I want to do is provide you with the definition of disinformation that we use at the Fusion Center. So disinformation is the spread of false information intended to deliberately mislead or deceive individuals. And disinformation is complex. It can appear in a number of different ways. It might be entirely false information, so no part of it is true. It might be something that's a true fact, but it's put in different contexts, so it makes it false information. Or it might be something that creates tidbits of the truth mixed with tidbits of things that aren't the truth. Disinformation, misinformation, false news, fake news, a lot of different terms are thrown around. The difference between disinformation and misinformation is that disinformation is intentional. So misinformation may be you retweeting something that contains false information, but you're not doing it on purpose. Disinformation has that intentional component to it where you're deliberately trying to mislead someone. And we've seen disinformation in a number of different realms. A lot of us are familiar with the 2016 presidential elections, and we'll talk a lot about Russia today. But disinformation affects a number of different things. How many of you are familiar with Pizzagate? Okay, a number of you, so that's awesome. So if you're not familiar with Pizzagate, Pizzagate was essentially a disinformation campaign that took place here in DC. So essentially it's the nickname that we now use for a conspiracy theory that started online and eventually made its way into mainstream media, so places like Twitter. And I'll show you a video in just a second of what happened as a result of that. But essentially this conspiracy theory alleged that members of Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign was operating a sex trafficking ring for children out of the basement of a restaurant here in DC. And we're going to see how this video works with the sound, but you'll be able to see what happened.
Yeah, bear with us. If this doesn't work, we'll try to get it to the group afterwards.
Real gunfire. A North Carolina man arrested in a DC pizza shop after brandishing a gun, telling police he was there to investigate a conspiracy theory called henceforth
Is that better at all?
according to police. Welch said that he had read online that the
All right. Well, I will make this little sit through the entire video with no sound.
Okay.
But essentially, Pizzagate was online conspiracy theory that resulted in offline action, and that's why we worry about disinformation. But disinformation is not new. We can tie instances of disinformation all the way back to ancient Rome. We saw it during the Cold War. But really what's changed about disinformation and about disinformation campaigns is the way that we conduct disinformation. So historically, a lot of the times disinformation would be through radio or television. Today we have this awesome thing called the internet and social media that allows us to share information much faster and much farther than before. And that can be great in a lot of different instances, but it also allows us to share and spread disinformation much more quickly. So we're seeing kind of this weaponization of disinformation, and we'll talk about a number of instances where we saw that throughout the briefing. But just keep that in mind. It's not something that's new. We have seen disinformation before. So I talked about it a little bit, but why do we care? So we're worried about that online action that results in offline violence. And while we typically think about disinformation campaigns as Russia during the 2016 presidential election, disinformation affects any number of topics. And really, we've seen disinformation campaigns launched against all of these different topics that you see here on the screen. So mass shootings, the NFL anthem debate, LGBTQ issues. We've seen it during white supremacist rallies, elections, voter suppression, any number of things. And I'm going to talk specifically about an instance in which we saw Russia conduct a disinformation campaign that resulted in a clash between two groups of individuals here in the United States without them ever setting foot on United States soil. So in 2016, during sort of the height of the refugee debate, Russia saw an opportunity to polarize and divide Americans. So they created two Facebook pages. The first being United Muslims of America, and the second being the Heart of Texas. On these two Facebook pages, they pushed different sides of the refugee debate, and they advertised for rallies that would take place at the same time and at the same location. And you probably won't be able to hear from this video, but you will be able to see the number of people that showed up at these rallies, and they were advertised all by Russia. This was not Americans who hosted this rally. It was organized in Russia, and it took place here in the United States. So what you can't hear in the video is there's actually individuals who are chanting, "Kill yourself." So they were very much polarized. The two sides of this debate showed up the same place, fighting, clashing, verbal altercations with one another. And again, Russia never had to come to the United States in order to make that happen. They were able to do all of that online. So really when we talk about disinformation, that's why we care, because it is so powerful, and we've seen the effects that disinformation campaigns can have here in the United States. But disinformation campaigns, while I will talk a lot about Russia, it is not just state-sponsored actors that are conducting disinformation campaigns. So criminals see the opportunity to use disinformation to extort money, or maybe when we talk about deepfakes in the future, to even get out of something to prove that they weren't there, they were doing something else at the time. Terrorists use it in their propaganda, and then we have conspiracy theorists. So we saw that with Pizzagate here in DC. So there's a number of players, a number of people who are motivated to use this information and to continue to have it be present here in our social media and on the internet. And while Russia created the playbook, so to speak, they started launching disinformation campaigns prior to the 2016 presidential election, and all of their tactics really were effective. They saw that they worked, and other state-sponsored countries have started to use that as well. We're also seeing domestic disinformation, and really that's perhaps one of the most concerning things. So we're seeing Americans that are promoting disinformation and targeting other Americans. So during the 2018 midterm elections, Twitter removed 6,000 accounts that were US-based individuals who are promoting either voter suppression, false information about the elections in order to promote this disinformation. So as we move towards the 2020 elections, that's something that we have to keep in mind, is that disinformation is no longer just going to be those state-sponsored actors. And typically, these disinformation campaigns are designed to focus on things that already divide us as Americans. They're not going to create an entire story and build it up. They're focusing on things that they know that we maybe argue over, whether that be politics or race relations, LGBTQ issues, immigration.
And they create these pages on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, and they draw people in. They'll use titles like Being Patriotic, Stop AI or Stop All Immigrants, Heart of Texas, Blacktivists, United Muslims of America, Army of Jesus, Brown Power, and LGBT United. And what you see from that is they're not targeting one side of the debate. So they're not pushing a specific agenda. They're just pushing what's going to amplify that division, whether that be socially, culturally, politically. And they get a lot of engagement. You can see here that almost all of these pages had anywhere from 1 million to 6 million likes, and anywhere from around 1 million shares to 4 million shares. So we're pushing this information out through Facebook and Twitter once it's created. And you might be asking, how do they do that? How do they get so much engagement, so many likes, so many shares? There's typically 2 tactics that are used to spread disinformation. The first is to use bots. So these are automated accounts. There's no real person behind them. They're set to retweet or repost content. And I'll talk a little bit later about how you can kind of identify something as potentially being a bot. But again, these are not going to have real people behind them. They're literally just pushing this information. And the second is shills, or you may have heard it as trolls. So these are real people. They're crafting this content. They're crafting this dividing message. And they're using it to push out that conflict of interest that's going to divide us and make us argue with one another a little bit more. They're also using advertisements. So they'll pay for an advertisement to run on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram in order to promote their agendas and then to drive traffic to their specific pages. So during the 2016 presidential election, Russia purchased 3,500 Facebook ads. And that might not sound like too many if you think about the number of ads that are run by each political campaign, for example. But those ads had 3.7 million users interact with them, and they were viewed 33 million times. So they got a lot of reach. They used things like roses are red, violets, tacos are enjoyable, don't blame a Mexican just because you're unemployable. So if you feel really strongly about one side or another side of a debate, you might be more inclined to click on that, to go to that page, to then share that content with your followers, who then, if you're following like-minded people, which most of us do, will then continue to push that agenda and those topics and information. And really, why does it matter? It matters because today we're not getting our news from newspapers. How many of you have a newspaper delivered to your house every day? Okay, so about 3 of you. So today we're going online. We're using Twitter, Facebook, your news app, whatever it might be, to get your information. When I wake up in the morning, I don't go get my newspaper and read it. I go on Twitter and I see what's trending, and that's how I get all the information that I need to know for the day. I might get an email that shares little 1 or 2 sentence lines that tell me the news, but that's the farthest that I go unless it really attracts me or makes me, want to read more about it. And so 68% of Americans are doing the same thing. They're only getting their news from social media. They're getting it from places like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, where we're seeing disinformation. And all of these accounts and these pages are designed so that you're seeing the content that you like. So if you're really far on one side or another, you might be more inclined to see this disinformation and to see that side of it and promote it and share it and continue with that. And overall, we're not taught how to read the news on Twitter. I didn't go to class and they didn't have me read a 280-character tweet and then tell me to interpret the meaning of it. That wasn't done in any of my education classes. But we need to start looking and thinking about that, how we read media, how we look at media literacy here in the United States. Because as more and more we use social media to get this information becomes a really powerful tool. And disinformation can look a number of different ways. So right here on the right-hand side, you see I Hear ICE agents will be at polling stations on election day looking to deport illegals trying to vote. So this was a tweet that was posted by an American during the 2018 midterm elections promoting voter suppression. More recently, we have an Instagram account which is targeting minority voters. So they're talking about how Bernie Sanders has so much student loan debt and here's what he's going to do. Click on this link and you'll be able to learn more. So they're targeting it in different ways based on the audience, and they're really smart about it. They know how to get you to click on something or what might be misleading to you. So disinformation can look different depending on what you're looking at, and that's important to keep in mind. And of course, as with anything, as time goes on, disinformation gets more complicated. So when disinformation first started, it typically was just those state-sponsored actors. But now we're starting to see kind of co-hosting. So you'll see a state-sponsored actor who identifies a Facebook user or a Twitter user or an Instagram user. and they see that they're sharing a lot of content that aligns with the page that maybe they're operating. They give them the opportunity to say, hey, we have this page, it has 2 million likes, X amount of shares, do you want to help us run it? Because then it becomes more challenging for the social media companies to remove those inauthentic accounts, because now it's an American who's running it and it's free speech. So it gets a little bit more challenging. It's getting complicated, and social media companies are having to navigate how they're going to remove this content if they find that necessary. We're also starting to see that sometimes disinformation is picked up by mainstream media. So in this image here, we have Iran who launched 3 missile tests, but they felt like 3 missiles wasn't enough. They wanted to add a 4th. So they photoshopped it in, and then they put it out on all of their media. Before it was identified that this was Photoshop, it was run by the Los Angeles Times, the Financial Times, and the Chicago Tribune. So then we're spreading disinformation through our mainstream media. So as time goes on, it gets more complicated, and we're expecting that to continue. So that's just something to unfortunately keep in mind. Speaking of things getting complicated, that's sort of the disinformation 101 end of this part of the brief. So now I'm going to talk about some of the technology that's likely to change the landscape of disinformation. And there are a number of technologies that kind of use AI or artificial intelligence to spread disinformation and to make disinformation more powerful. But what I'm going to focus on today is deepfakes. So how many of you are familiar with deepfakes? Okay, good. So deepfakes are computer-generated audio or video forgeries that falsely depict a person saying or doing things that have never happened. And they are able to do this through artificial intelligence to manipulate the voice recordings, to overlay images, superimpose videos, to create these realistic fake videos. And they're getting really good at it, and I'll show you one in just a second. But essentially, when deepfakes made their way onto the scene in 2017, it was a Reddit user who thought that it would be fun to post it on the platform. From that point, somebody created an app, because someone always creates an app. And now any individual with an internet connection and a computer or a phone can create their own deepfake using images they have. Now these deepfakes aren't going to look great. They're going to look like it was made with an app that was freely downloaded. But one of the caveats to deepfakes right now is that it requires a large number of photos of an individual in order to create a realistic deepfake. You need somebody who's able to pull those voice recordings, to see a number of images so you can get someone from the side angle, from the front, from the other side. So typically our targets for those are going to be politicians, celebrities, but over time that's changing because this technology is getting better. And in 2019, the Skolkovo Institute of Science and Technology in Moscow unveiled a new technology that will allow you to create deepfakes with a single photo. So think about the number of pictures that you have of another individual on your phone, the number of people who have one picture of you on their phone or on their social media. As this technology gets better, it's not going to happen tomorrow or the next day, but as it gets better, it creates the risk that somebody might be able to create a deepfake of you with virtually no images at all. So that's why we worry about deepfakes. But before I keep going on about the highs and the lows of deepfakes, I do want to show you a deepfake. And again, unfortunately, the sounds may not work, but you'll be able to see just how the superimposing works on those videos. So this is a pretty popular deepfake. It was shared by BuzzFeed about a year ago. So a lot of people have seen it. You may have seen it prior to this briefing. But essentially, it just shows you the power of the technology. So it's really powerful. It makes you kind of question something. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, how much is a video worth? So as we talk about deepfakes, it is important to remember that they're not the first visually manipulated images that are used to create false scenes or display fake images. So since 1988, Photoshop has allowed us to do this in a lot of similar ways. Today, you can display a false scene, create fake people, retouch images, alter real people, and I can go online and search how to create an infernal scene in Photoshop, and I have the step-by-step instructions available to me in 30 seconds. It takes about 20 minutes. It's not very difficult. They'll give you all the steps to do that. But when Photoshop first started, it wasn't great. You can see from this picture that she's clearly not on the Great Wall of China. She's superimposed, she looks copy and pasted, everything's a little fuzzy around her face, but over time that technology got better. So soon it became editing errors that made it noticeable that something might have been changed. So here they got them holding hands, but unfortunately they left a third limb in there. So if you're looking closely enough, you'll be able to detect that. But then the technology got so good that something like this, where the straw has been added, is virtually indistinguishable from something like this. And that same progression is why we worry about deep fakes. We're already seeing that you can take one image of one person and potentially create a deep fake now. So as this technology gets better, it becomes a really powerful tool for disinformation. If we take some of the examples that we talked about today, like the Heart of Texas and United Muslims of America, imagine if those Facebook pages had also contained realistic videos that depicted these refugees harming American children. Or on the other side of that, individuals wearing Texas flag hats and painting graffiti on a mosque. In Pizzagate, imagine if there had been a video of these children chained in the basement of the restaurant. It's a lot more difficult to distinguish something from being true or false if there's a video or an image associated with it. And so that progression is really why we focus on deepfakes. And what brings me to the golden question, how do we detect them? So detection efforts for deepfakes are ongoing throughout government, academia, the private sector, and a number of companies have launched efforts to detect deepfakes to better counter them so that when we're looking at disinformation, deepfakes don't have to be such a concern. One of the ones that I'll highlight is the U.S. Defense Advanced Research Project, or DARPA's Media Forensics Program. Essentially what they're doing is they're looking at light levels and image mapping in order to determine if something has been altered visually in the video. And you can kind of see a little bit of what they're doing with that in this image. They also recently launched their Semantic Forensics Program, which essentially is looking for semantic inconsistencies, but the bottom line is that they're teaching an algorithm how to critically think. So they're looking at, are the earrings mismatched? Is she wearing lipstick on her top lip but not her bottom lip? Things that you can see as you're watching the video if you're critically thinking about what you're looking at. We also have academic professors and researchers who are taking efforts to detect deep fakes. But unfortunately, one of the challenges with deep fakes is that some of the best detection methods are using algorithms to detect them. And all of these algorithms can be altered and changed. So in June of 2018, they realized that deep fakes didn't blink. They would blink about every 10 to 15 seconds. It was really weird, and you could tell that it wasn't an actual image of a person. Once they released the detection method for this, it had a 95% success rate. They could tell if something was a deep fake. Within about a month, they changed the algorithm so that now deepfakes blink. And so they're continuing to do that. They're continuing to determine something that might clue you in that something's a deepfake, and then the algorithm is altered to eliminate that. So it's kind of a back and forth, and it's a challenge. But deepfakes are still a relatively new technology, and so that brings me to my next point, which is you can do a lot to determine if something's a deepfake, or sometimes we call them shallow fakes, where it's not quite using that algorithm technology, but maybe it slowed the speech down, or it looks a little off. Looking for things like boxes around the images when they're speaking, or you kind of suddenly just see blurred lines, or the lips change, or the eyes change colors. So when you're watching something, not just taking it at its face value, but kind of looking for clues that something may be a deep fake, particularly if it seems off to you. And then also looking at differences in appearance from previous videos. So last year, there was an airing of the president's address, and he was speaking on national news, and one of the television stations aired altered footage. But it took almost 24 hours until the next morning when a radio station brought attention to the fact that he looked very different in all of their footage that was aired in Seattle to everything else that was aired nationwide. But if you look at this photo, you know immediately that it's altered, but nobody was looking for it. So making sure that you're watching what you're looking at, what you're reading, and looking at it critically. And that brings me to the last part of this brief, which is what you can do and what we're doing to protect ourselves from disinformation. So as a result of disinformation worldwide, it's not just affecting the United States. There have been a variety of different tactics to address and combat disinformation. We've seen task forces, media literacy bills, investigations, bills passed in general on deepfakes and whatever else it might be. And some of the most notable are the European Commission, which has launched a massive budget to combat disinformation, and they're working on developing a rapid alert system. So it would alert somebody when they identify a disinformation campaign in real time rather than after the fact. We also see places like the Democratic Republic of the Congo who've launched tip lines so that when WhatsApp messaging begins spreading misinformation or disinformation around Ebola, they're alerted to that and they're able to kind of make public statements to combat that. Specifically here in the United States, we've seen both government and industry take efforts to combat disinformation, and we've done that in a number of different ways. We introduced the Honest Ads Act, which essentially asks that large public corporations like Facebook and Google make public what people are buying political advertisements for, who's buying them, how much they're paying for them, and where they're being run. And while this has still only been introduced, a lot of those companies have chosen to abide by it regardless, and you can already see any of the Facebook advertisements that are run online if you search for Facebook political ads. At least you could the last time I searched it. So. We've also had legislation to bolster media literacy, and that's in individual states. So as of February of 2019, 24 states, as well as the District of Columbia, have either introduced or passed media literacy bills focused in their education for schools and for children. We have government agencies that are raising awareness. They're building tools like DARPA's media forensics and semantic forensics programs to detect this manipulated media. We've also seen corporations like Google who are launching digital safety projects. They're teaching kids how to identify something as an altered URL or what might look a little different when you're reading a news article, kind of trying to build out that awareness and build out that media literacy. And lastly, social media companies are taking action. So we recently saw that Facebook launched a deepfake detection challenge. So they're partnering with Microsoft and a number of other companies to try and identify ways to detect deepfakes. And they've banned deepfakes on their platforms. There are challenges associated with that, but they're taking steps in the right direction. There are ways for you on Twitter to, when you sign up now, you have to include a phone number and an email so that they can send you a text. So that it's a little bit less easy, more difficult for a bot to create an account and push all of that content. And then individually, there are things that you can do. So you can install a media browser plugin on your browsers, whether that be Firefox, Chrome, these kind of all vary depending on the browser that you're using, but they'll tell you things like this website typically pushes out false content. We've flagged things as misinformation or disinformation before. They might tell you if the website's incredibly biased to one side or the other, but you're able to know what you're reading and you're able to go to websites that are reliable. Also comparing content, so we talked about it with deepfakes, but looking at other things that have been posted before by maybe the article that you're reading. Looking at the author's information, a lot of the times we'll see that they will put the author's name as one thing and then use a different author's bio in the bottom. So comparing those two different things when you're reading the news and when you're reading things on social media. Scrutinizing your social media network. So do you have a lot of people who use, and I'll talk about some kind of indicators for bots in just a second, but do you have a lot of people who may be bots? Don't push out that content that they're pushing. And then just overall increasing your media literacy, so building awareness about what disinformation is and where we're seeing it online and on the internet. And to do all that, it's really important to understand the tactics of disinformation campaigns. So a lot of the times, and this is not the silver bullet solution, not every disinformation campaign is going to look like this. I do want to caveat that. But a lot of the times you will see that they're only retweeting or reposting content. So they're not going to craft original content because it might push out something that says, you know, we has XYZ and the grammar is totally off. So then you know that it might not be real. They might retweet similar accounts that could also be bots. So they're all kind of acting in this, we call it coordinated inauthentic behavior. They might respond really quickly to trigger topics. So are they only talking about race relations or politics on those pages? Using the default or the stolen profile pages, and this is becoming more difficult as social media companies kind of require you to put on a profile picture now, but using the Twitter egg or the shadow box on Facebook rather than including your own profile picture. They might lack specific location details, or they might get the location wrong. So down here in this image, it says the Obama White House rather than the White House. They might also misspell words or have grammatical errors. On the top, it says, the time has come to understand one simple thing. We, the American Muslims, are as American. It doesn't make any sense, but if you're not reading it closely, then you might ignore that. So looking for grammatical errors, looking for things that focus really heavily on American stereotypes, and also looking for those advertisements that are designed to drive traffic to those pages and push a specific agenda like I showed you earlier. When it comes specifically to bots, which again are not real people, but they're just pushing this content over and over again, there are a lot of clues that something may be a bot. The first is automated activity. Bots are going to push a ton of content over a really short period of time. One of the studies that I looked at said that some of the bots that were used during the 2016 presidential election tweeted 705 times per day. I don't have time to do that. I highly doubt that you have time to do that. So just looking, are they tweeting every 3 seconds? They can't be doing anything else if that's the case. Amplification, so only retweeting. Again, no original content, nothing that would make them seem like they're crafting their own thoughts. Using anonymity, so not setting a profile picture or using something that if you do a reverse Google image search, shows up for a ton of different profiles. Language, so they might retweet in English, and then Spanish, and then French, and then whatever else. And maybe they do speak all of those languages, but most of the time you're not going to be switching between all of them after every single tweet. And then lastly, your profile and the username. Are they only using an alphanumeric, so ABC 1, 2, 3? They're not doing something that's unique to them as an individual. These are all really great tips for how to identify a bot. And when it comes to shills, which are real people, it can be a little bit more challenging because, again, these are real people who are crafting this content. But there still are a lot of ways to sort of distinguish that something may be a shill. So the first being content. Again, only looking at trigger topics. Are they pushing American stereotypes? Are they focusing on race relations, politics, whatever we know is politically, culturally, or socially dividing here in the United States? They also might have poor grammar. So maybe English isn't their first language, especially if it's a state-sponsored campaign. So we're seeing them use has instead of have, or as we saw in the previous couple slides, we the Americans as our Americans, things that don't make sense to us when we read it. Using photos, stock photos, again, instead of showing your profile picture of a unique individual, something that when you reverse Google search it, it comes up for a number of different accounts, or it comes up as a stock photo in general. And then lastly, using icons, so using a lot of emojis to fill in words so that maybe they aren't giving away that grammar error that we might see. So now that I have probably scared you and made you feel like there's no light at the end of the tunnel, I do want to highlight some of the things that we are doing at the Fusion Center to combat disinformation so that you're aware that there are people who are working on this. We're doing our best to combat it, but there are also things that you can do, and hopefully you'll take some of these tactics and use them when you're online on your internet and social media accounts. But at the NTIC specifically, we're preparing for a shift in our adversaries' tactics. We know what worked in 2016 may not be what they do in 2020. And there are a lot of new tools that have emerged, like deepfakes, that allow us to kind of change the landscape of disinformation. We're also producing assessments on disinformation campaigns. And primarily we do these at the fully unclassified level. So on the next slide, I'll show you our website, but we've pushed out a number of products that talk about disinformation. It talks about what disinformation looks like in 2016, what it looks like now, what deepfakes are, and what we kind of predict for disinformation as we move forward. We're also engaging stakeholders, so working with the social media companies to have a better understanding of how they're combating disinformation, how we can help them, and how they can help us. We work with our DC Board of Elections to make sure that our election infrastructure is secure. And then we also offer trainings, so trainings like this one, to stakeholders so that we can better raise awareness, because we really believe that raising awareness about disinformation is going to be one of the best ways for us to combat it. So with that being said, this is how you can get in contact with us. If you do have any questions, I'm happy to take those now, but we are also happy to provide trainings to any individuals that you think might benefit from hearing about this. So thank you.
Hi, so I'm Abby. I'm with ATF. So all of us in this room run blue checkmark government agency social media accounts. So I know you kind of talked about what we can do as individuals, but as people who are often targeted by disinformation, and shills especially for ATF, what are ways we can use our social media accounts to counter those narratives? What tactics would you suggest instead of just not engaging?
Right.
How can we proactively engage and counter this?
So that's a challenge. And I don't run the social media for our agencies, so I don't have experience on that side of it necessarily. But typically what we suggest is just making sure that the information that you're pushing out is accurate. So thinking about something before you retweet it. If it's not another blue check mark account, if it looks a little funny, maybe just don't share it. So not pushing out that content. And then for yours specifically, we've seen clarification statements come out from places like SEMA and others during natural disasters. So if that's something that needs to be done, then considering that as an option. But it is a challenge. Disinformation exists everywhere. But again, those same tactics for you as an individual on what might look like disinformation or maybe a shill or a bot still apply when you're using your government accounts for how to kind of identify it or better identify it. I know that's not a great answer, but.
So this is Laura from USPTO. I have kind of a related question. So a few years back, I was the only person working right over the holidays, and we had this funny situation where suddenly we were seeing in our social media streams, because we track people mentioning our hashtags, like hundreds of female porn spam bots. And I had never run into this before, but they had all the hallmarks that you described. They were all named Jennifer with some sort of other name. They had a variety of sort of stock photography or maybe like photography from porn sites as their profile pictures. And basically they just kept like tweeting at us. We didn't really know what to do, and we took the approach of like, just ignore them and hope they go away and move on to someone else. But I'm wondering along those lines, are you seeing that kind of thing? And if so, is just ignoring them the right approach, or is there something even more proactive that we could do in terms of reporting them?
So a lot of the disinformation campaigns that we look at have already passed, and we're using it to learn about what disinformation campaigns might look like. With that being said, all of these social media companies, because of the rise of disinformation, have various methods for reporting what you believe to be coordinated and authentic behavior, and every company kind of may use different terminology for that. But if it's something where you feel like you're seeing a ton of it, if you have a connection to those social media companies, reaching out to them and flagging that content for them, they appreciate it. They have people who are working on that, and they're looking at content and looking for those different things, but there's so much content out there. So flagging those accounts, marking them as something that may be false is a really great way to start. And it really does just depend. If it's something where you feel like a lot of people are gaining false information and it's going to cause potential public safety harm from our standpoint, that's typically where we feel like we should maybe say, hey, this is what's accurate. Please refer to X resources where we know you can get the right information. Maybe not calling something out or like, quote tweeting it and being like, also look at this page, but allowing for someone to just making sure that you're sharing the accurate information and hoping that users are looking for that information overall.
Hi, I'm Vince from the National Science Foundation. My question is actually about scientific disinformation. Could you comment on the prevalence and sources of stuff like that, like anti-vax hoax?
So we have seen the vaccination debate be targeted by disinformation. We see a number of instances. So one of the examples that I'll highlight, for France, they had an instance where a WhatsApp message began spreading that the water was radioactive and it was contaminated, and they started calling into the water service companies and to the public health agencies, so much so that they had to come out and make a statement saying the water is fine to drink, there's nothing that's contaminated, it's not radioactive. So we see disinformation in any number of realms, and the scientific community is not immune to that.
So are you aware of any federally coordinated effort that would, an awareness campaign that messages would be given to agency social media managers so that we can get out this good information that you've provided today?
So again, I don't work necessarily in like the public affairs realm, so I'm not familiar with that. It may exist. I know that DHS, CISA, and a number of others have pushed out unclassified products on what disinformation looks like in their shops. So there may be something available, but I'm not personally familiar.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry, I know that doesn't.
Are there any other questions?
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.